Chapter 1. The 13th Floor. I never thought I'd be stuck on the 13th floor of a crumbling skyscraper, surrounded by flesh-eating nightmares and a scent so putrid it made my stomach churn like a blender filled with rotten meat. The faint glow of my phone's flashlight danced along the graffiti-scarred walls, illuminating the horror that lay in every shadow. My name is Jack Wilder, and if the world didn't end today, it would surely end tomorrow. The building creaked ominously, the kind of sound that made me question whether it was the structure settling or something far worse lurking beneath. The air was thick with decay, a stench of rot that clung to my skin like a funeral shroud. As I clenched my fists, the only weapons I had left, I could hear the distant moans of the undead echoing through the halls. They were hungry, always hungry. A door slammed shut behind me, a reminder that this place was a coffin waiting to be sealed. I pressed my back against the cold wall, trying to quiet the frantic thudding of my heart. I knew the layout well. 8 floors above, each filled with their own horrors, and 12 below, where the remnants of humanity once tried to survive. But for now, all I could focus on was the deafening sound coming from apartment 13B. It started as a low growl, a guttural noise that made my skin prickle. I leaned closer, curiosity battling with terror. Then came the wet, ripping sounds, like a butcher tearing through flesh. My stomach flipped, and I fought the urge to vomit. The door vibrated with the force of their feasting, each muffled scream mingling with the sickening crunch of bones snapping like twigs beneath a boot. "Fucking hell," I muttered under my breath, half in disbelief, half in morbid fascination. I imagined what was happening behind that door. The unfortunate soul, a victim of bad luck or worse timing, now being reduced to a meal. I could almost visualize it, the flesh being torn from their body, blood pooling on the floor, the smell of iron and rot mixing with the stale air of the corridor. "Dinner time," I quipped, my voice dripping with dark humor as if that could somehow lighten the crushing weight of despair. I choked back bile as the sounds escalated, a chorus of growls and frenzied chewing that made my skin crawl. The stench intensified, sour and metallic, mingling with the stale odors of mold and despair that permeated this forgotten hellhole. It was time to move. I forced myself to turn away from the cacophony of death, each step heavier than the last. The hallway was a gauntlet of horror. The flickering fluorescent lights cast ghostly shadows, distorting the shapes that danced along the walls. I could feel their eyes on me, the empty gazes of the undead longing for fresh meat. I approached the stairwell, my only means of escape, the door heavy and grimy under my palm. Each creak echoed ominously, a reminder that the building was just as alive as the monsters within it. I paused, taking a deep breath, trying to drown out the noise behind me. It was futile. The screams crescendoed into a frenzy, a symphony of horror that shook me to my core. "Just a little farther," I whispered to myself, my voice barely above a breath. I took a step toward the stairs, but my instinct screamed at me to turn back. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I imagined the bloodied remains left behind in that apartment. I could almost see the splatters, the handprints smeared against the walls as the zombies dragged their meal into their twisted embrace. Suddenly, I heard a low thud, followed by a sickening crunch. I froze, heart racing, my mind racing faster. Had they finished? Was it over? The seconds stretched like eternity as I contemplated my next move, every instinct telling me to flee, to run before I became the main course in their grotesque banquet. But then came a sound that shattered my resolve, the unmistakable rattle of the doorknob, followed by a soft thump as something, or someone, struggled to break free. I could hear the guttural snarls, the frustrated growls, and the soft, haunting wail of what might have been a voice. "God, please don't," I murmured, the weight of my own fear wrapping around me like a noose. I needed to act. I needed to escape. I turned on my heel, sprinting toward the stairwell. I could hear them now, the zombies within that apartment, their guttural growls morphing into frenzied howls of hunger. "Open the door, I'm starving!" I shouted back, a final jab of defiance mixed with humor, trying to mask my terror. I slammed through the stairwell door, adrenaline flooding my veins as I descended the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the agony in my legs. Behind me, the sounds of my pursuers echoed, a chilling reminder that I was not alone in this nightmarish descent into madness. With every step, I felt their hunger, their desperation, their twisted desire for flesh growing closer. My heart raced, and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Just another day at the office," I muttered, as I plunged deeper into the darkness of the building, hoping I could outrun my own nightmares before they consumed me whole. Chapter 2. The Depths of Darkness. The stairwell was a suffocating void, an abyss that swallowed any semblance of light. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, reverberating against the damp, moldy walls that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I stood there, crouched low, barely daring to breathe, every sound magnified in the oppressive darkness. Just 2 floors above, I could hear them, the growls of the zombies, angry and insatiable, their guttural voices echoing through the air like a sinister symphony. I moved slowly, my senses heightened, relying solely on sound and smell to navigate this hellish descent. The air was thick and rancid, cloying like a wet blanket soaked in blood and rot. I hesitated, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me as I inched forward, feeling my way along the wall, each footfall deliberate and silent. Then, suddenly, my foot landed in something wet and squishy. My heart dropped into my stomach, and panic surged as I realized it was stuck, something slimy and foul enveloping my shoe. It squelched beneath me, the noise horrifyingly loud in the stillness of the stairwell. I had to pull it out. I needed to escape. Gripping the railing for support, I crouched down, heart pounding like a war drum. I felt around in the dark, my fingers brushing against the cold, slick surface. Whatever I had stepped in was thick, gelatinous, and horrifyingly warm. I tugged at my foot, struggling against the sticky grip, my pulse racing as the snarls above grew louder, more agitated. Finally, with a wet, slurping sound, my foot broke free, but not before the skin on my ankle scraped against something sharp and jagged. I gasped, the pain jolting me back to reality. But the horror didn't end there. My stomach lurched as I realized what I had been tangled in, the half-eviscerated abdomen of a body, completely consumed and discarded like a sack of rotten vegetables. "Holy shit!" I stammered, bile rising in my throat as I stared into the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The stench of blood and decay was overwhelming, the visceral horror of my surroundings suffocating. I could feel their presence now, the creatures above, sensing my disturbance like sharks detecting blood in the water. With renewed urgency, I stumbled back, my mind racing as I felt the first stirrings of panic wash over me. The growls became more pronounced, a symphony of hunger closing in, and I could hear the scuttling of feet above, echoing down the stairs like a death knell. I needed to move. I raced down the remaining steps, blinded by the darkness, my fingers clawing at the walls for guidance. Each thud of my heart echoed in my ears, drowning out the sickening sounds that followed me, the creatures below awakening to the feast above. The walls seemed to close in, and I felt the pressure of their collective hunger pressing against me, eager to consume. Frantically, I reached the door to the 11th floor, my hand fumbling for the handle. When I found it, I yanked it open with a desperate force, stumbling forward and falling onto the cold, hard floor. "Holy shit!" I gasped, rolling to my feet as I slammed the door shut behind me, heart racing. The sounds of growling and gurgling echoed in the hallway, the footfalls of the undead thrumming in my ears like a morbid chant, their anticipation palpable. I launched myself down the corridor, adrenaline surging through my veins, desperate for safety. The hall was dim, each door looming like a black hole, my eyes frantically scanning for salvation. I needed a place to hide, a sanctuary from the chaos threatening to consume me. I reached out blindly, pushing on door after door. Locked. Locked. My breath quickened, the fear becoming a living entity that clawed at my insides. Then, at last, my fingers brushed against a handle, and I twisted it, bursting into the inky blackness of a room. The door slammed shut behind me, sealing me away from the horrors of the hallway. I pressed my back against it, panting heavily, straining to listen for the sounds of the monsters that prowled just beyond the threshold. My surroundings were a dark void, the air thick with the musty smell of mildew and dust. I waited, heart racing, straining to hear anything over my own ragged breathing. The growls echoed faintly through the door, but they were distant now, their hungry chorus muted in this small haven. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I had found a temporary respite. But as I stood there in the pitch blackness, the oppressive silence of the room began to feel suffocating, wrapping around me like a vice. I could feel something watching, lurking in the dark corners, and as my eyes adjusted, I noticed the outlines of shapes, something just beyond the edge of my vision. I cursed under my breath, the dark humor failing to lighten the despair clinging to my skin like a second layer. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach as I realized I wasn't alone after all. As the walls closed in and shadows danced around me, I knew this nightmare was far from over. Chapter 3. The Maintenance Closet. I eased the door open, holding my breath as I peered into the hallway. The darkness loomed like a thick fog, a suffocating presence that felt alive, crawling with anticipation. I slipped out of the occupied apartment of death, careful not to disturb whatever horrors lurked in the shadows, and quietly closed the door behind me. The soft click of the latch felt like a small victory, a moment of stealth in a world that craved my flesh. Moving silently down the corridor, I scanned the area, straining to hear anything other than the distant growls that echoed through the building. Each step measured, my instinct screaming for caution. Then I spotted it, a maintenance closet at the end of the hall. I approached, my heart racing with the thought of what supplies I might find inside. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking softly. The sight that greeted me was a veritable trash heap of a closet. Brooms, mops, and fluorescent light bulbs piled haphazardly. The air thick with the musty smell of mildew. Roaches skittered across the floor, their tiny bodies glistening in the dim light. "Ugh," I muttered, flicking one off my shoulder like it was an annoying fly. I took a moment to collect my thoughts, steadying my breathing as I stepped inside. The space was cramped, but it would do. I turned on my phone flashlight, illuminating the chaos around me. Among the clutter, I spotted a glorious sight. 2 mops with removable handles and a 5-foot section of 3-inch thick galvanized metal pipe leaning against the wall. Perfect, I chuckled to myself, giddy with the anticipation of the carnage I could inflict. This wasn't just survival, it was a twisted game, and I was ready to play. I yanked the handles off the mops, the wood splintering under my grip. One of the handles broke into a jagged 4-foot section, the end sharp enough to cut through flesh like butter. I fashioned a makeshift backstrap using the rope I found on the top shelf, slinging it over one shoulder and under the other, securing the broken mop handle and the full-sized one across my back like crude arrows in a quiver. I grabbed the metal pipe, its weight comforting in my hands, the cold steel promising destruction. Rummaging further, I spotted a flashlight tucked away among the chaos. Batteries appeared fully charged. Delicious, I said, grinning as I snatched it up and tucked it into my waistband like a revolver, ready for action. I paused for a moment to shake off the finger-sized roaches crawling on me, disgust twisting my stomach, then turned to exit the maintenance closet. I stepped into the hallway, taking a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever awaited me outside this filthy haven. As I moved through the corridor, I felt a new sense of purpose. My heart thrummed with a mix of dread and exhilaration. I approached a window at the end of the hall, drawn by the chaotic scene unfolding below. I could hardly believe what lay before me. From the 11th floor, the view of the city block was nothing short of apocalyptic. The skyline marred by black smoke rising from the rooftops of nearby skyscrapers, the air thick with ash and soot, casting a grim pallor over everything. The street below was a nightmare come to life. Cars lay abandoned, some flipped upside down, others ablaze, their flames licking hungrily at the night sky. In the distance, I could see figures running, people scrambling in all directions, their screams muted by the distance. A mother clutched a child, darting between 2 overturned vehicles, while others pushed past each other, panic radiating off them in waves. It looked like a scene straight out of World War Z, a living canvas painted in chaos and horror. The flickering flames illuminated the faces of the terrified, casting their features in stark relief against the night. Shadows danced wildly, and the silhouette of a zombie stumbled into view, its rotting flesh illuminated by the glow of a nearby fire. The creature paused, turning its head as if sensing the heat of life, before shambling towards a group of survivors, desperate for flesh. I leaned closer to the window, eyes wide as I watched the scene unfold. A horde began to form, grotesque and relentless, moving with a singular focus, like a wave of death crashing against the remaining vestiges of humanity. I could almost smell the acrid smoke mingling with the scent of burning rubber, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the charred remains of vehicles. "Welcome to hell," I whispered, the words dripping with dark humor. The reality of my situation hit me hard. This was no longer just about surviving the building. It was about surviving this godforsaken city, where every shadow held a threat, and every sound was a reminder of how fragile life had become. I took a step back from the window, the urgency of my predicament settling in. I needed to get out of this building, away from the horrors that awaited me. But I also had to prepare for the battles ahead. The weapons I had fashioned offered a glimmer of hope, a promise of power against the grotesque monstrosities that now ruled the streets. As I turned away from the window, I felt a sense of determination surge through me. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, to carve my path through this nightmare. I just had to remember that in a world gone mad, survival meant embracing the chaos and wielding it as my own. Chapter 4. The Company You Keep. 10 floors. Just 10 floors between me and the outside world. But did I really want to go out there? The city was burning, crawling with the dead. And, let's face it, probably smelled worse than this apartment building after any Saturday night. I remembered something. The north side of the building. 2 apartments on the 5th floor. Fire escapes. The bedroom windows led right to them, like hidden trapdoors in a world that suddenly needed trapdoors. Maybe I could bypass the last 4 floors of inky black hell down below and escape through one of those windows. The south side stairwell was out of the question now, overrun with zombies pissed off that I'd interrupted their little stairwell party. So that left the far side stairwell. I usually avoided that one. It was always full of vagrants and, as my grandma used to say, ne'er-do-wells. But hey, beggars can't be choosers, and in this particular case, I was both. I reached the far stairwell, easing the door open. A dim, flickering fluorescent light cast just enough of a glow to make the shadows seem twice as ominous. The kind of light that either went out when you really needed it, or when you just couldn't handle one more thing going wrong. Either way, bad omen. I started down the steps, one at a time, creeping like a thief in my own building. Shuffling. Something was down there, one flight below me, and it sure as hell wasn't the janitor. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, throwing erratic shadows across the stairs. That's when I saw it. A dark shape huddled in the corner of the unlit stairwell. My pulse shot through the roof. Before I could stop myself, I jumped and nearly soiled my pants as a sharp yelp cut through the silence. "Shit!" I gasped, grabbing the metal pipe like my life depended on it, which it kind of did. "Damn, man, calm the hell down," a voice rasped back, half angry, half scared. "Dave? Dave, the dope fiend shootin' dope, who don't know the meaning of water nor soap," I sang rhythmically, my voice bouncing off the walls as I tried to catch my breath. Dave, still shaking from the shock of me almost turning him into a Dave-flavored kebab, gave me a look. "Man, now's really not the time for your little jokes." "Nah, now is exactly the time for jokes," I grinned, patting him on the shoulder. "Look where the fuck we are, man, it's hell. Ain't no better time to laugh than when you're standing in a burning dumpster of the apocalypse." He cracked a shaky laugh, his cracked lips curling into a smile. "I guess, man. I guess." Dave wasn't exactly the guy you'd picture when thinking of zombie apocalypse survival squad. No, Dave was more like the guy you'd expect to find wandering into a 7-Eleven at 3 a.m. for Funyuns and a Coke, eyes glazed over, wearing mismatched socks. But here we were. Funny how life works out. "So, what's your deal, man?" I asked, as I leaned on the pipe, taking a quick breather. Dave rubbed the back of his neck. "Bunch of them things chased me into the stairwell from the 8th floor. Could hear more of them below, so I started moving up. That's when I ran into you." "Well, isn't that just fantastic?" I said, deadpan. "Sounds like we're destined for the 10th, or, a quick trip to hell on the 9th. I reached back and handed Dave the full-size mop handle, the one I hadn't sharpened into a medieval stake. "Here, man. Don't say I never gave you anything." Dave took the mop handle, examining it like I'd just handed him a golden scepter. "This thing better work," he muttered. "Yeah, just don't poke yourself in the eye with it." I took the lead, listening carefully as we descended. Each creak of the stairs felt like it could be the last sound I ever heard. When we reached the 10th floor landing, I eased the door open. We peered inside, straining to hear anything. Nothing. "Seems doable," I whispered. "Let's keep moving. We'll check out the next one." We crept down the stairs, the air growing thicker with the scent of decay and sweat. Suddenly, a noise echoed up the stairwell, a low, hungry moan followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet. More zombies. Great. "Another zoomie of zombies," Dave muttered under his breath as we reached the 9th floor. We peered in through the door's small window. The hallway beyond was disturbingly calm, as if preserved in time. Peaceful, serene, and horrendous. Perfect for us, I grinned. Yeah, a real paradise, Dave said, rolling his eyes as he followed me inside. We walked carefully down the hall, checking every door. Most were locked, but a couple of apartments stood open, their contents strewn across the floor like the aftermath of a hurricane. We dug through the mess, picking up whatever we could find. After a few minutes, we added 2 butcher knives to our meager arsenal. Knives are good, I said, twirling mine in my hand, but they'll have to wait until my pipe of death needs a break. Naming your weapons now? Dave asked, his voice half amused, half nervous. Hell yeah. You've got to get in the spirit of things, man. We're in the apocalypse. You think Rick Grimes just called his revolver a gun? No, it's got to have character. Dave chuckled. All right, you've convinced me. With our new toys in hand, we made our way back to the stairwell on the far side, ready to push downward toward the 5th floor and the fire escapes I remembered. As we moved, I filled Dave in on the plan. Okay, so here's the deal, I said. 2 apartments on the 5th floor, north side, both have fire escapes. We get there, we get out, we bypass the last few floors of this nightmare, and maybe, just maybe, we don't die horribly today. That's the best plan I've heard all week, Dave said, gripping his mop handle like a knight ready for battle. Then let's get it done. And hey, if we make it out of here alive, first round's on me. He snorted. Dude, there ain't no more bars. Well, I shrugged. That's why I'm planning to open one when this is all over. And guess what I'm going to call it? What? The Last Call. Dave smirked, shaking his head. You're a real clever little fella, aren't you? I try. Now, let's move before your new mop sword gets you killed. With that, we crept back into the stairwell, descending toward whatever fresh hell awaited below. Chapter 5. Battle for the 6th Floor. The stairwell echoed with the relentless pacing of zombies below us, their feet dragging against the concrete steps like some kind of horrifying countdown. Dave and I didn't have much time, but we weren't idiots. The 6th floor was our next move, but it felt like walking into the mouth of hell itself. I pushed the door open, barely getting it halfway before I heard the rapid thud of footsteps from the left hallway. My reflexes kicked in, and I swung my trusty pipe of death without a second thought. The sound that followed was grotesque, a wet, crunching thud as the pipe caved in the zombie's skull. Its face crumpled like cheap tinfoil, flesh and bone exploding in all directions. A chunk of something I would very much like to not identify flew straight into my gaping mouth mid-battle cry. I gagged, spitting it out just in time to hear a groan behind me. Whipping around, I saw Dave ready to channel his inner Babe Ruth, mop handle in hand like he was about to hit the home run of his life. The next poor bastard sprinted towards him, its rotting hands outstretched. Crack! Dave shouted, though it wasn't necessary. The sound of the mop connecting with the zombie's skull was loud enough. It went down, twitching on the ground like a broken toy. I charged in to finish the job, bringing my battle pipe of doom and despair down with a sickening splat. Dave stood up, grinning like a lunatic, both of us covered in a fresh coat of zombie juice. He wiped some of the mess off his brow. Dude, we're killing it. I was about to crack another joke when I heard the unmistakable shuffle of more undead coming down the corridor. 3 of them, all ready for their slice of action. They came at us with vacant, lifeless eyes, groaning like they'd been waiting for this moment all day. I tightened my grip on the pipe, stepping forward. What? You want a piece of me? I growled, adopting the kind of stance you only see in baseball highlight reels. I swung my trusty pipe of obliteration, hard, and it smashed into the first zombie's head, caving it in like a rotten pumpkin. Blood, gore, and bone sprayed across the hallway. Dave snickered beside me. Dude, you don't have to keep yelling out new names for your damn pipe every time you swing it. Shut up, man, I shot back, adrenaline still pumping as I lined up for the next hit. Dave cracked the second zombie across the face, but the mop handle, already showing signs of wear and tear, snapped clean in half. Without missing a beat, I brought my pipe down on the third zombie, flattening its skull with a wet thwack. Dave didn't let his broken mop handle slow him down, though. He drove the jagged, splintered end into the zombie's abdomen. The thing gurgled as a thick, black ooze poured from its gut, splattering onto the floor like spilled ink. We both stood there for a second, breathing hard, taking in the scene of utter carnage around us. The hallway looked like someone had detonated a meat grinder. Blood soaked the floor, walls, and ceiling. I even spotted what looked like an earlobe stuck to one of the flickering fluorescent lights. Jesus, Dave muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Yeah, I replied, wiping off what I could from my face. But hey, we're still standing. After catching our breath, we began combing through the floor, moving room to room. There wasn't much. This floor had already seen its share of carnage before we arrived. Papers and debris scattered across the hall, furniture overturned, walls smeared with desperate handprints in dried blood. We found some bottles of water, a couple of flashlights with low batteries, and, miraculously, a first aid kit that hadn't been looted yet. Dave and I exchanged a quick glance as we packed what we could. I can't believe we survived that, Dave said, almost as if trying to convince himself. Yeah, but don't get too comfortable, I said, gripping the pipe tightly. We're only halfway through the building, and I don't know about you, but I'm not keen on meeting the rest of the neighbors. We both looked at each other and started to laugh, the kind of manic, exhausted laugh you only get when you've narrowly escaped death. We knew the fight wasn't over, far from it. But for now, at least, we'd won this round. Time to move on, though. The fifth-floor fire escape wasn't going to find itself. Chapter 6. The Symphony of Skulls. We moved through the battlefield we had made, stepping over the gore-splattered bodies left in our wake. The scent of death hung heavy in the air, a cocktail of blood, rot, and despair. I glanced over at Dave, trying to lighten the mood. Anything to stave off the crushing reality of the world we were now surviving in. Hey man, I started, wiping some brain matter off my jacket sleeve. How's that girl you were talking to a while back? You two still together? Dave shot me a look that could have melted steel. She's dead, man. She got eaten the first day of this nightmarish end-of-the-world shit. I grimaced, trying to backpedal. Oh, better luck next time, huh? Dave's expression was halfway between shock and pure what the fuck, so I raised my hand, smirking. Kidding, man. I'm sorry. Really. I didn't mean... Dave waved it off, but the silence was heavy. Not like he needed a reminder, and I sure as hell didn't need to bring up the fact that my family didn't make it out either. 4 nights ago, after busting my ass at work, I came home to find them ripped apart, torn to shreds in our shithole apartment on the 13th floor, all in pieces, limbs thrown like confetti at a macabre party, with one zombie standing over their bodies, gnawing on what was left. Apartment 13C was where my life ended and where this nightmare began. I shook the thoughts out of my head, focusing on the present. We were almost to the stairwell when we heard a creak from down the hallway. Both of us spun around, pipes raised and ready to bring the pain. Hello? The small voice echoed down the blood-stained hall, and my eyes landed on a familiar figure. Jimmy. His face was ragged, clothes torn, but he was alive. Holy poop sandwich, I yelled, half in shock, half in relief. Jimmy, is that you old corn dog? Jimmy grinned, despite the chaos surrounding us. Yeah, man, it's me. Been stuck in this apartment with those things outside. I see you two seem to evict them, though. Yep, cleaning house, I said, lowering my pipe. We're heading to the 5th floor to hit the fire escape. You in? Jimmy nodded quickly, Sounds like a plan. He ducked back into his apartment for a second and came out with a grin on his face, carrying 2 aluminum baseball bats. He tossed one to Dave and kept the other for himself. The apartment owners must have been baseball enthusiasts, Jimmy snickered. Fucking A, Dave muttered, testing the weight of the bat. This is more like it. We made our way into the stairwell, trying to move quickly but quietly. As soon as we stepped onto the landing, we heard it, the unmistakable shuffle of bodies, coming from both directions. The low growls of hunger, the clattering of feet. I cursed under my breath. We weren't alone anymore. Shit, Jimmy muttered, already gripping his bat tight. Before we could scramble back into the 6th floor door, they were on us. A horde of zombies spilling from both up and down the stairwell, a mass of decaying flesh and gnashing teeth. We didn't have a choice. We had to fight. Dave was the first to move, pulling the butcher knife from his waistband with one hand while swinging the bat with the other. The blade sunk deep into the skull of the first zombie that rushed him. The sound of the knife cracking through bone was nauseating, but there was no time to hesitate. I followed his lead, pulling out my own knife and plunging it into the eye socket of the next one. The zombie let out a horrific, gurgling moan as it collapsed in a heap. I yanked the blade free, kicking the corpse aside just in time to swing my pipe at another that was barreling toward me. The sickening, hollow echo of the aluminum bats filled the stairwell like some twisted symphony. Each hit a brutal concerto of destruction. Dave's bat connected with a skull, the sound like someone cracking open a coconut. Jimmy let out a whoop as he swung his bat with all the force he could muster, caving in a zombie's face like it was made of paper mache. One by one, they kept coming, and we kept swinging. Blood and bone splattering across the narrow stairwell like abstract art. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of growls, groans, and the metallic clang of our makeshift weapons connecting with flesh. The stench of rot filled the air, thick and suffocating, mixing with the sharp tang of blood. "Come on, you rotting fucks," I yelled, smashing my pipe into the temple of another zombie, its head snapping back like a Pez dispenser as its body crumpled to the floor. Dave was beside me, his knife flashing in the dim light as he plunged it into the throat of another zombie, twisting it savagely before wrenching it free. Jimmy was a blur of motion, his bat swinging wildly as he slammed it into one after another, black blood spraying in all directions. But they kept coming. "Too many!" Jimmy shouted, swinging his bat so hard it rebounded off the wall. "Get back to the door!" I yelled, realizing the horde wasn't slowing down. We were going to be overrun. We fought our way through the thick mass of bodies, swinging and stabbing with everything we had. The stairwell was a war zone, the air thick with the scent of death and decay. I took one last swing, the pipe crushing another zombie's skull, before grabbing the handle of the 6th floor door and yanking it open. "Move!" I shouted, ushering Dave and Jimmy inside. We slammed the door shut behind us, the growls and moans muffled but still far too close for comfort. Panting, we leaned against the wall, catching our breath. "That was close," Dave gasped, wiping blood off his face. "Too close," I agreed, my heart still pounding in my chest. Jimmy, still clutching his bat, gave a shaky laugh. "You guys sure know how to throw a party." I grinned, adrenaline still coursing through me. "Stick with us, Jimmy. The night's just getting started." Chapter 7. Dining in Hell. We made our way back through the 6th floor, navigating the aftermath of our recent battle. The hallway was an abattoir, a grotesque exhibition of carnage. Limbs lay scattered like discarded refuse, and the walls were painted with the splatter of zombie brains. Each step was accompanied by the nauseating squelch of blood-soaked shoes. Jimmy led us to the door of the apartment he had come from, and we slipped inside. It was small and unremarkable, like 100 other anonymous units in this crumbling building. Dave looked around, gesturing to the mismatched furniture. "So, whose place is this?" he asked, his voice laced with exhaustion. Jimmy shrugged, rifling through a cupboard. "Hell if I know. I just ran in here when those bastards out there," he thumbed toward the door, "tried to snack on my ass." "Lucky find," I said, grabbing a couple of cans off the counter. "Spaghetti and meatballs, ravioli. Looks like we hit the culinary jackpot." Dave grabbed a can opener, slumped onto a grimy chair, and popped open a can of spaghetti. In no time, he was shoveling it into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. I watched him for a moment, then leaned over, grinning. "How's your worms, Dave?" He stopped mid-bite, a noodle half hanging from his mouth. "What?" "Worms, man. You're eating worms," I said, laughing. "Yeah, right," Dave mumbled, swallowing hard. "This ain't the Lost Boys, jackass?" "Might as well be," I teased, grabbing a can of ravioli and cracking it open. I spooned a chunk of meat and pasta into my mouth, savoring the lukewarm mush like it was a gourmet meal. "If you see Kiefer Sutherland, let me know." Jimmy wrinkled his nose, looking at us like we were insane. "How the hell are you two eating that shit after what we just saw?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "For God's sake, it looks like what we left piled up all over the stairwell." Dave slurped up another sauce-drenched noodle, grinning like an idiot. "Yeah, man. Fucking brains." I almost choked on my ravioli, laughing as tomato sauce dripped down my chin. "Well, we earned it," I said between bites, my stomach growling in agreement. "Might as well enjoy something while we still can." Jimmy, however, wasn't so easily convinced. He stared at his unopened can like it might bite him. "I think I'll pass on the imitation zombie guts for now," he muttered, setting it aside. Once we were sufficiently full, if you could call it that, Dave and I wandered over to the windows, peering down at the city below. From this height, the fire escape was visible, but way too far down to jump. "Not gonna make that leap without breaking both legs," Dave observed, frowning. "Yeah, not the plan." I turned to Jimmy. "If things go south, we could use the window to reach the fire escape. But for now, we need to focus on getting through the other stairwell." The city outside was a nightmarish scene. Fires raged across different blocks, throwing twisted shadows on the buildings. Abandoned cars littered the streets, some overturned, others engulfed in flames. Dark figures, human or not, moved aimlessly among the wreckage, as if the entire city had become a buffet for the dead. From the 6th floor, it was like staring down at some hellish painting come to life. "Jesus," Jimmy muttered, his voice quiet. "It's worse than I thought." I watched the chaos for a moment longer, then turned to them with a grin. "You know, there's a bar I know just outside the city," I said, tapping the window pane. "On the edge of the harbor. Boats docked there, too." Dave raised an eyebrow. "And your point is?" "Well, maybe we head that way. I'm thinking we grab a few beers, sing some karaoke, crack some skulls, then steal a boat and get the hell out of here." Dave snorted, but a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Karaoke, huh?" "I bet you've got one hell of a voice in the apocalypse." Jimmy laughed, crossing his arms. "Sure, man. Maybe we can belt out Don't Stop Believin' while we're at it." I shrugged. I was thinking more Highway to Hell, but whatever works. The mood lightened a bit, despite the grimness of our situation. The thought of escaping this city, even if only for a fleeting moment, sparked a glimmer of hope in the dark. But we had a long way to go before we could even think about that bar by the harbor. We made our plan for the other stairwell. It was on the far side of the building, likely to be crawling with vagrants before the dead took over. Now, who the hell knew what was in there? But we didn't have a choice. The stairwell we came from was filled with a zoomy of zombies, as Dave liked to call it. Our only option was to head for the far stairwell and hope for the best. "All right," I said, cracking my knuckles. "Let's do this." The three of us gathered at the apartment door. I took a deep breath, gripping my trusty pipe, while Dave and Jimmy each held their baseball bats tight. Slowly, I turned the knob, the metal cold and slick under my fingers. The hinges creaked softly as I pulled the door open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. "Well," I whispered, stepping through the doorway. "Here goes nothing." Chapter 8. Date Night in Hell. The wet, slurping sounds hit us as soon as we reached the 5th floor landing. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood, and every step down felt like we were walking into a meat locker. Slowly, carefully, we peered around the corner down to the 4th floor landing. What we saw was enough to turn anyone's stomach. 2 zombies hunched over a body, tearing flesh from bone. One of them, once a woman, was a bloody, gory mess. Her tattered dress clung to what was left of her decayed skin, and a single heel dangled from her half-eaten foot. I nudged Dave with a smirk, keeping my voice low. "Hey man, I think she's your type. Classy, well-dressed. Maybe she's into long walks through the apocalypse." Dave shot me a look that was half disgust, half amusement. "You're sick, you know that?" "Hey, better to laugh than to cry." I winked. "Besides, she might still be open for a date, though I can't promise she'll make it through dinner." Jimmy snorted from behind us, barely suppressing his laughter. Dave shook his head, trying to keep a straight face. "Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to pass on that one." We backed away slowly, leaving the undead people to their romantic dinner. As much as I enjoyed the morbid joke, we had no intention of sticking around for dessert. Once we reached the 5th floor door, I gave the handle a gentle twist. Locked, of course. "Damn it," I whispered, trying a few other doors along the hallway. All locked. "We're gonna have to break into one of the fire escape apartments," Dave said, gripping his bar tightly. I nodded, eyeing one of the doors that looked a little worse for wear. "All right, let's try this one. Get ready for some noise." With a quick motion, I slammed the heel of my boot against the door, trying to force it open. The wood groaned, then splintered, and the sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. "Well, that was loud," Jimmy muttered. We didn't even have time to react before we heard the unmistakable shuffle of approaching zombies. They were coming. A door down the hall burst open, and out came a wave of rotting bodies, their lifeless eyes zeroing in on us. There was no time to think. My trusty pipe was already in my hands, and I swung it like I was stepping up to bat in the bottom of the 9th inning. The first zombie rushed me, all gnashing teeth and rotting stench. I brought my pipe down hard, but instead of cracking its skull, I drove it straight through its chest. The sickening crunch of ribs breaking filled the air, and the zombie staggered, my pipe embedded deep in its torso. "This here's my boomstick," I yelled out, giving it an extra twist for good measure. Jimmy, already in the middle of his own fight, burst into laughter. "Hell yeah, man, sweep 'em up!" Dave was beside me, bringing his aluminum bat down on another zombie. The bat connected with the creature's skull, shattering it into pieces like a watermelon at a county fair. Brain matter and bone fragments sprayed everywhere, but Dave kept swinging, determined to clear the hallway. The sight was both horrifying and surreal. Blood and guts, a cacophony of violence mixed with laughter. It was like a fever dream, the three of us knee-deep in zombie carnage, fighting for our lives, but somehow finding humor in the absurdity of it all. I guess when you're staring into the mouth of hell, you either laugh or lose your mind. After a few minutes of sheer chaos, the last of the zombies hit the ground with a thud. We stood in the hallway, panting, surrounded by a mess of broken bodies and blackened blood. "Man, that was intense," Jimmy said, wiping sweat and gore from his brow. "Yeah, well, no one said the apocalypse would be easy," I replied, finally yanking my pipe free from the zombie's chest with a squelch. "Now let's get inside before round 2 shows up." We kicked open the apartment door and quickly barricaded it with a couch and a few chairs, stacking whatever we could find against it. Once the place was secure, I made my way to the window. The fire escape was just below us, a shaky-looking metal ladder that led all the way down to the alley below. It wasn't the best plan, but it was our only shot. "All right," I said, turning to Dave and Jimmy. "Here's the deal. We'll head down the fire escape, but no one goes alone. We stick close together on the ladder, so no one ends up alone on the ground for too long. If a horde shows up, we're going to need to move fast, so no hesitating." Dave nodded, wiping his bat clean on the leg of his pants. "Got it. What about you? You leading the way?" I looked out the window again, scanning the alley below. The streets were eerily quiet for the moment, but I knew better than to trust that silence. "Yeah," I said. "I'll go first. Jimmy, you're after me. Dave, you bring up the rear. We'll cover each other's backs." Jimmy checked the window one last time, nodding in agreement. "Sounds good. Let's just make sure another horde of those zombies or whatever the fuck Dave called them doesn't sneak up on us again. I've had enough surprises for one day." With a final glance at the carnage we'd left behind, I opened the window, the cool night air hitting my face. It was time to move. "All right, boys," I said, swinging my legs out onto the fire escape. "Let's get the hell out of here." And with that, we climbed out into the night, ready for whatever fresh hell awaited us below. Chapter 9. Run for your life. I hit the ground first, my boots skidding across the cracked pavement as I waited for the others to follow. Jimmy was halfway down the fire escape, the rusted metal ladder groaning beneath his weight with every step. The clanking sound echoed off the alley walls, and my heart raced, convinced that any minute now it would bring unwanted company. "Keep it quiet, Jimmy," I muttered, glancing nervously down the alley. Shadows flickered against the walls from the fires that raged in the distance, and the air smelled of burnt plastic and decay. Every sound felt like it was magnified, amplified by the silence of the dead world around us. Yeah, I'm working with a death trap here," Jimmy grumbled, carefully lowering himself rung by rung. His eyes kept darting to the ground, clearly hoping that the ancient fire escape wasn't about to collapse under him. Above us, Dave started his descent. I heard the metal creak louder under his weight. "Come on, Dave, easy does it," I called up, my voice barely above a whisper. But, as usual, Dave was about as quiet as a bull in a china shop. Every step he took down the ladder made the whole damn thing rattle and clank like it was begging to fall apart. "Just don't look down," Dave said through gritted teeth as he clanged his way down. That's when we heard it. A low, guttural growl followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling feet. Lots of them. I whipped my head around, and there they were, at least 30 zombies rounding the corner, their dead, hungry eyes locked onto us. A sea of rotting flesh, torn clothes, and gaping mouths, all coming our way. Fast. Guys," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've got company. Big, hungry company." Dave landed next to me with a thud, eyes wide as he saw the approaching horde. "Holy shit," he breathed. "That's way too many to fight." "No kidding," I snapped, already breaking into a run. "Move!" We took off full speed, sprinting down the alley like our lives depended on it. Because they did. The zombies, surprisingly fast for a bunch of dead things, came after us, their feet slapping the pavement, their growls growing louder. I could hear them gaining on us, their grotesque hands reaching out for anything that got too close. The alleyway narrowed, trash cans and dumpsters lining the sides, fires burning from overturned cars behind us, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I leapt over a burned-out husk of a car, barely clearing it as Jimmy and Dave followed behind, their breaths ragged from running. "This reminds me of the Warriors," I panted between gasps, glancing over at Jimmy. "You know, bopping our way back to Coney Island, except instead of rival gangs, we've got rival zombies." Jimmy, somehow managing to laugh despite the chaos, nodded. "Yeah, man. Just trying to make it home, except there's no baseball bat-wielding gang here, just these rotting freaks." "Same situation," I chuckled, though the sound was cut off by the blood pounding in my ears. I could feel the weight of the chase pressing in on us. the tension in the air growing with every step. We were running for our lives, and there was no telling how long we could keep it up. We hit another alley and skidded around the corner, the ground littered with debris. Broken glass, shattered bricks, and the occasional half-eaten corpse. The city had become a graveyard, and every street, every corner felt like a trap just waiting to spring. Fires burned out of control, turning the night into a hellish landscape of flickering orange and black shadows. "There!" I shouted, spotting a fence at the end of the alley. "We can jump that!" The fence was tall, maybe 10 feet, with jagged spikes at the top, but it was our only chance. The horde was still close behind us, their footsteps echoing in my ears as we sprinted toward the fence. Without thinking, I grabbed the top and hauled myself over, ignoring the jagged spikes scraping against my clothes. Jimmy was right behind me, grunting as he flung himself over, landing in a heap on the other side. Dave was the last to go, his arms shaking as he pulled himself over, dropping to the ground with a hard thud. We paused for a second, gasping for air, listening as the horde slammed into the fence behind us, their bodies piling up in a desperate attempt to follow. "That'll slow him down," Dave panted, hands on his knees. "Yeah, let's hope so," I said, glancing down the alley. "We need to keep moving. This won't hold him for long." We ducked into another alley, weaving through the maze of twisted metal and broken-down cars. The streets were a war zone. Burnt-out vehicles flipped on their sides, smoke billowing from shattered windows, and random fires burning in the distance. It was like someone had taken the worst parts of a post-apocalyptic movie and cranked it up to 11. The smell of burning rubber and death hung in the air as we leapt over debris, ducked under crumbling signs, and squeezed between collapsed buildings. Every corner we turned, I half expected another group of zombies to leap out at us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, we skidded to a stop in an alley overlooking the harbor. The water glistened under the moonlight, the dark waves gently lapping against the shore. It should have been peaceful, our ticket out of this nightmare. But there was one slight problem. Between us and the harbor stood at least 1,000 wandering zombie fuckers. The streets were packed with them, an endless sea of bodies, all aimlessly shuffling around, their vacant eyes occasionally catching a flicker of movement. We were trapped. "Shit," Jimmy whispered, staring in disbelief at the massive horde. "How the hell are we supposed to get through that?" I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the pipe in my hand. "I don't know, man, but we're gonna have to figure something out, fast." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead sinking in. The harbor, our escape, was just within reach, but between us and freedom was the deadliest gauntlet we'd ever faced, and it wasn't going to be easy. Chapter 10. The Knowledge Buffet. We stood huddled in the shadowy alleyway, peeking out at the sea of undead lumbering between us and the harbor. Over 1,000 of them, groaning, shuffling, rotting bastards, stood in our path, filling the streets like some twisted festival parade. The only thing missing was the confetti and a marching band. The harbor glistened in the distance, mocking us with how close yet impossibly far it was. We needed a new plan. "We go right," I whispered, eyes scanning the narrow streets ahead. "Hug the outer edge of the harbor. If we stick to the alleys, we can bypass this horde." "Bypass? You mean the horde of death and dismemberment out there?" Dave asked, raising a brow. Jimmy, forever the optimist, grinned. "Piece of cake." "Yeah, sure, like eating glass with a side of rusty nails," I muttered. With a nod, we took off, hugging the wall of the valley, slipping into the shadows like thieves in the night. Halfway down the narrow passage, the stench of decay hit us like a wave. Rotting meat, mold, and that wet, coppery tang that never fails to remind you of death. It clung to the air, suffocating. As we crept, I noticed something grotesque hanging on a rusty fence post. A human face, or at least what was left of one. skin torn like paper, eye sockets gaping. It flapped in the breeze like a sick party decoration. "Looks like someone didn't make the finish line," Dave muttered under his breath. "Hope they had a nice fall," I quipped, suppressing a gag. But we had no time to reflect on the grim scenery. The alley spilled out into a massive open courtyard in front of the old library. No cover, just a massive, yawning expanse that was practically screaming, "Come and eat us." "The library? Seriously?" Jimmy asked, glancing at the imposing 4-story behemoth, its Gothic windows glaring down at us like eyes of a sleeping beast. I nodded, swallowing hard. "We've got no choice." We sprinted for it, the sound of our footsteps echoing across the open space like gunfire, far too loud. Halfway across, I saw one of the zombies near the edge of the courtyard twitch, then turn its head toward us. "Shit, they saw us!" Dave shouted, his voice laced with panic. "Run!" I yelled, pushing my legs harder as more of them turned. The horde stirred to life, like we'd just kicked over a hornet's nest. They poured into the open, screeching like banshees, limbs flailing, hunger in their dead eyes. We crashed through the heavy wooden doors of the library, slamming them shut behind us, the pounding of undead fists on the other side vibrating through the wood. The musty smell of old books hit me, a strange comfort amidst the chaos. Inside, it was eerily quiet, but the kind of quiet that hides things. Rows and rows of towering bookshelves stretched into the gloom, their tops lost in the shadows. It was like being in a maze of paper and wood. The only light came from a flickering chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling. "Stay low. Stay quiet," I whispered. "We'll make our way around the walls. If we can get to the staircase, we can get up to the second floor and figure something out." We hugged the perimeter, ducking behind shelves and peeking around corners like we were in some spy movie. The occasional groan or shuffling sound echoed in the distance, telling us we weren't alone, but for the moment, the zombies were scattered, giving us the advantage. Then we saw it, the grand staircase. It looked like something straight out of The Great Gatsby, a massive sweeping structure with 4 lanes, leading up to a second floor that was as luxurious as it was deadly. I could almost hear jazz music playing in the background. "Classy," Jimmy whispered, his eyes wide. "You think Gatsby had zombie problems?" "Only after the party," I said, inching forward. We almost made it. Almost. But then 2 zombies in a corner turned, their milky eyes locking onto us. There was no more sneaking. "They see us!" Jimmy shouted. "Here we go!" I yelled, gripping my pipe tightly. We rushed the 2 of them, and the moment my pipe smashed through the first zombie's face, teeth and gore spraying everywhere, I shouted, "You say you're hungry for knowledge? Here it is! Eat it!" Dave groaned, bashing a zombie's head in with his bat. "Let me guess, you renamed your weapon Knowledge, right?" I grinned. "You know it." But my quip cost us. The noise was like a dinner bell for the rest of them. A chorus of moans echoed through the library as they closed in from all directions. What had been a quiet, calculated escape turned into an all-out chaotic brawl. Zombies shuffled and charged at us from every direction, their gnashing teeth and rotting limbs turning the library into a war zone. Books flew off the shelves as we slammed zombies into them. Pages tore through the air like confetti at the world's worst parade. Jimmy, laughing like a madman, ripped the spine of a book from one of the zombies' heads, using it as a makeshift weapon. "I don't think that's how you return books, man," I shouted, bringing my pipe down through another zombie's skull, splattering gray matter onto the dusty floor. "No, it's fine. They've got a great late fee system," Jimmy called back, his laughter mixed with the grotesque crunch of breaking bones. For 30 long minutes, it was a whirlwind of swinging weapons, tearing flesh, and flying body parts. We moved like a well-oiled machine. Bash, duck, stab, and repeat. The sound of splintering wood and the stench of decay filled the air as more zombies piled in. "This place is going to need a serious restock," Dave shouted, his bat taking the head off another ghoul with a sickening thwack. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we saw a break in the horde. "Up the stairs!" I yelled, already sprinting toward the grand staircase. My legs burned as I took the steps 2 at a time, Dave and Jimmy hot on my heels. The library wasn't just a place of learning anymore. It was a goddamn battlefield. We barely made it to the 2nd floor, panting and covered in blood and who knows what else. But we were alive. For now. As we caught our breath, I looked at the others, wiping the blood from my face with a grim smile. "Well, looks like the library's closed for good." Jimmy chuckled, his hands on his knees as he gasped for air. "Good thing. My late fees were killing me." And with that, we glanced back down at the sea of zombies on the 1st floor, wondering just how the hell we were going to make it out of this one. Chapter 11. Dead Eyes, Broken Hearts. The 2nd floor of the library was quieter, but not by much. The occasional shuffle or groan from zombies lurking in the shadows still put us on edge. Dust hung in the air like a fog, disturbed by the commotion below, as if the building itself was unsettled by what it had become. A graveyard of words, silence, and the dead. "All right," I whispered, motioning for Dave and Jimmy to follow. "We stick to the walls, work our way around to the right side. There's gotta be a window up front where we can get a look at what's going on outside." "Sounds like a plan," Dave muttered, gripping his bat tight. Jimmy was quieter than usual, which either meant he was thinking or he was just plain scared out of his mind. Knowing Jimmy, probably a bit of both. We moved carefully, our footsteps barely more than a whisper on the cracked and dusty hardwood floor. The rows of bookshelves were still tall and imposing, offering some cover, but every now and then, I caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the shadows. Zombies, scattered about like forgotten mannequins. The flickering light from outside played tricks on our eyes as we darted from one shelf to the next, avoiding the undead like some sick game of hide and seek. As we neared the right side of the library, I paused, motioning for Dave and Jimmy to stop. Ahead of us, in front of a massive arched window, stood a sight that none of us wanted to see. A woman, her back to us, stood near the window. Her clothes were tattered and filthy, her long, matted hair draped across her hunched shoulders. Bloodstains covered her back and sides, the dried crimson mixing with dirt, grime, and who knows what else. But that wasn't the worst of it. To her left, holding her hand, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, a small backpack hanging limply from his shoulders. Like the woman, the kid was caked in blood, his tiny frame swaying gently back and forth as if he were still alive, still attached to some distant memory of being comforted by his mother. Dave let out a low, pained sigh. "Oh man, that's fucked up." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Jimmy shook his head, his eyes wide as he looked back at us. No, not doing this, man," he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm not about to kill some kid. Zombie or not, I can't." I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, fuck this. Let's get over to the other side. Maybe we'll find a less depressing window to ponder out of." We slipped back into the shadows, moving along the edges of the room, giving the mother and child a wide berth. The silence between us was thick, and not just because we didn't want to alert the undead. It was the kind of silence that comes when your heart is too heavy to carry words. I could feel it pressing on all of us, the guilt, the sorrow, the brokenness of what we were seeing. For a second, I thought about going back, about putting them out of their misery, but the idea of bashing in the head of that kid, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. "Think we should..." Dave trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I can't do it." Jimmy just stared ahead, eyes locked on the floor. "Yeah, me neither." We moved in silence for a few minutes more, until we reached the far end of the 2nd floor. The windows here were large and cracked, offering a partial view of the streets below. We peered out cautiously, eyes scanning the chaos outside. The horde was still there, but most of them seemed oblivious to our commotion inside. Good. That's a lot of damn zombies, Dave whispered, eyes wide. No shit, I replied, my heart racing as I thought about how we were going to make it through. But before I could dwell on it too long, I spotted movement out of the corner of my eye. 3 zombies were wandering near the far end of the room, moving slowly but purposefully in our direction. Crap, we've got company, I whispered. All right, new plan. We take these 3 out quietly, no noise. We can't let those 2 across the way hear us. Jimmy shot me a look. Seriously? We're going full stealth mode in here? I grinned. I've been playing James Bond games since I was a teen, man. Been preparing for this moment my whole life. Dave snorted, trying not to laugh. Yeah? Let's see how your spy skills hold up in the apocalypse, 007. We crouched low, moving like we were sneaking up on someone in Call of Duty. It was ridiculous, I know, but sometimes in the middle of the nightmare, you have to find a way to laugh. Otherwise, you're dead. Okay, here's the plan, I whispered, laying it out like a tactical operation. Dave, you take the one on the left. Sink your knife right into its head, clean and quiet. Jimmy, you're on the middle one. Bash its brains in quick. I'll take the one on the right. We do this in one motion, all at the same time, so no one alerts the mother and child across the way. They both nodded, faces grim but determined. It was a plan. A stupid plan, maybe, but it was all we had. We spread out, moving silently into position. My heart was hammering in my chest, every creak of the floor feeling like a gunshot in the stillness. Dave crept up behind his target, his knife gleaming in the dim light. Jimmy raised his bat, ready to strike, while I moved toward the last zombie, gripping my pipe tightly. For a moment, everything froze. Then, in perfect unison, we struck. Dave's knife sank into the skull of the first zombie with a sickening squelch. Jimmy's bat connected with the middle one's head, bones cracking as its body crumpled. I swung my pipe in a clean arc, the back of the last zombie's head giving way like a rotten melon. Brains splattered against the nearby shelf, the zombie collapsing in a heap. We stood there, breathing heavily, watching as the 3 bodies slumped to the floor, lifeless for the second and final time. "Well, that was smooth," Dave said, wiping the blood off his knife with a rag. "Stealth kills, baby," Jimmy whispered, grinning. "We should get XP for that." I laughed softly, the tension breaking. If only life had XP, man. We looked back across the way at the mother and child. They hadn't moved, still standing there, still swaying gently, still lost in whatever hellish afterlife they were trapped in. "Think they'll even notice us anymore?" Dave asked, nodding toward the pair. "No," I said, my voice thick. "They're already gone." For a moment, we just stood there, staring at the tragic tableau before us. It wasn't right, any of this. The world had gone to hell, and we were just surviving in the ashes of something that used to be human. Finally, I shook my head, tearing my gaze away from the pair. "Let's keep moving. We've got a harbor to reach." And with that, we turned, leaving the mother and child behind, their hollow, undead eyes watching us as we slipped back into the shadows, our hearts heavier than ever. Chapter 12. Down the Rabbit Hole. The second floor of the library was starting to feel more like a trap the longer we stayed. Shadows stretched out, swallowing the room in an eerie quiet, and the air felt colder with each step. It wasn't just the zombies that got to you. It was the claustrophobic feeling that you were slowly running out of time and options. "We should find a way down," I said, glancing toward the upper floors. "Going up to the 3rd or 4th floor is not going to help us get to the harbor." "I vote for down," Jimmy piped up, already moving toward a door on the far wall. Upper floors mean more zombies, plus the third floor's and the children's section, and I'm not ready to see any more zombie kids at the moment. You think down is any better? Dave asked, raising an eyebrow. What if we're walking into a basement full of them? I shrugged. I mean, at least we'd be going the right direction. Down's closer to the exit, right? Jimmy shoved the door open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase. It looked like something ripped straight out of an old haunted house movie. The iron railing was rusted, the steps creaking under our weight as we descended. Creepy, Jimmy muttered. How is this even up to code? It's not, I said, gripping the rail and peering down. The staircase spiraled into darkness, no other doors in sight. The deeper we went, the more that thick, damp basement smell started creeping up to meet us. Mold, decay, and something else. Something almost metallic. Halfway down, Dave paused. Hold up. This doesn't feel right. What? I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. We're not heading to the ground floor. This is going all the way down, Dave said, peering over the railing into the gloom below. Oh, great. We're going into the freaking basement, Jimmy groaned. Just what I wanted. I shot him a glance. We can't turn back now. It's too quiet up top. Quiet means trouble. Jimmy rubbed the back of his neck, clearly torn. You're right, it's just... basements, man, it's always the damn basement. The staircase eventually emptied out into a pitch-black hallway that smelled like mildew and old cardboard. As we stepped off the last stair, I could see faint shapes emerging from the darkness. Boxes, crates, metal shelves. A storage area. But not just any storage area. This place stretched on as far as the eye could see. A labyrinth of stacked crates, forgotten boxes, and old furniture. It was the kind of place that would have given me the creeps even without a zombie apocalypse going on. Dark corners, shadows lurking everywhere, and the feeling that something, or someone, was watching us from the gaps between the piles. Jimmy stopped and pointed ahead. I think there's a service store around here somewhere. I remember seeing it when I used to drive around town. One of those big roll-up doors. If we can find it, maybe we can sneak out. Good, I said, wiping sweat from my brow. We go out the door, head around the back, and make our way to the harbor. Sounds easy enough, Dave muttered, his voice heavy with doubt. We moved cautiously, our flashlights illuminating narrow paths between towering boxes. Every now and then, we'd hear a distant creak or scrape, but it was hard to tell whether it was just the building settling or something else. Jimmy looked back at me through squinted eyes and whispered, Man, this place is a fucking nightmare. It's like that creepy warehouse level in GoldenEye, remember that? Yeah, I whispered, chuckling. Except way less fun and way more likely to get us killed. Plus, no odd job to cheese your way through the level, Dave added. The banter helped, but it was getting harder to ignore the oppressive weight of the basement around us. Every step felt like we were trespassing deeper into something we didn't understand. Something dark, abandoned, and hungry. We'd been wandering for nearly 45 minutes, weaving between rows of shelves and crates, searching for any sign of that ramp Jimmy mentioned. And then I heard it. A low grunt. Frozen in place with my hand held up, signaling for silence, I listened and peered into the inky gloom beyond. The three of us stood perfectly still, straining to listen. Another grunt, louder this time, echoing off the walls of the basement. What the hell was that? Jimmy whispered. I don't know, Dave replied, gripping his bat tightly. Then came the sound of feet, heavy, deliberate, slapping against the concrete floor. Plat, plat, plat. The footsteps were slow, almost casual, like whoever, or whatever, was out there had all the time in the world. We stared down the long, dark aisle between rows of crates and shelves, but the shadows were too thick to see anything. Plat, sklooch, plat. Another grunt, this one sounding more inquisitive, as if whatever it was had caught a whiff of something it didn't quite recognize. From the corner of my eye, on my right, I see movement. Slow, deliberate. Then, out of the gloom, a massive shape emerges like a battleship appearing on the edge of heavy fog in deep water oceans. Grabbing a handful of my shirt sleeve, Dave exhaled a raspy, fear-ridden bellow into my left ear. "Holy shit," his voice barely audible. "Not this motherfucker." It was the janitor, Big Steve. Or rather, what used to be Steve. The guy had always been big, at least 7 feet tall and built like a brick wall. But now? Now he was something else. His flesh was torn, hanging off in strips, and his face looked like someone had taken a sandblaster to it. Muscles bulged under his shredded uniform, his bloodshot eyes scanning the room. The janitor locked eyes with us, and then all hell broke loose. Steve let out a bellowing roar and charged, barreling down the aisle like a runaway freight train. I barely had time to raise my pipe before he was on us, swinging his massive arms. I dodged to the side, feeling the rush of air as his fist flew past my head. Jimmy wasn't so lucky. He took a direct hit to the chest, flying back into a stack of boxes like a rag doll. Shit! I swung my pipe, aiming for his knee, the iron connecting with a sickening crack as Steve dropped to one knee, letting out a grunt of pain. "Fuck him up!" I shouted. Dave didn't need any encouragement. He raised his bat and brought it down towards Steve's head. But the zombie was faster than we thought. In one fluid motion, Steve reached up and caught the bat mid-swing, holding it like it was nothing more than a toy. "You've got to be kidding me!" Dave yelped, as Steve yanked the bat out of his hands and tossed it aside like garbage. Before I could react, the janitor's other arm shot out, grabbing Jimmy by the leg as he tried to get up. With a single, casual flick of his wrist, he threw Jimmy clear across the room again, sending him crashing into more crates. "Jimmy!" I yelled, but there was no time to check on him. Steve was already getting back to his feet, towering over us. With no other options, I did the only thing I could think of. I swung my pipe with everything I had, aiming for his face. The iron connected with a crunch, and Steve's nose caved in, blood and bits of bone splattering across the floor. But it didn't stop him. The giant zombie stood there, swaying slightly, his ruined face barely registering the blow. His eyes were empty, dead, but he wasn't going down without a fight. "Get ready!" I shouted. "We have to end this. Now!" The three of us surrounded him, weapons raised. For a moment, the basement was silent, save for the sound of Steve's labored breathing. Then, all at once, we attacked. Dave swung his bat into Steve's ribs with a thud, while Jimmy, finally back on his feet, cracked a crowbar against the janitor's spine. I brought my pipe down on Steve's head, feeling the sickening give of bone and flesh beneath the impact. But Steve wouldn't die. He flailed, swatting at us with his massive arms, throwing us aside like we were nothing. Blood and gore flew through the air, the smell of rot and decay thickening with each hit. We kept swinging, our weapons drenched in blood, muscles screaming in protest. But the giant just wouldn't go down. Bringing my pipe down onto Steve's face, I screamed, "Go down, you son of a bitch!" The force of the blow crushed his skull, caving it in like a pumpkin. His body twitched, then collapsed to the floor in a heap of blood, bone, and gore. We stood there, panting, covered in the janitor's remains. The silence was deafening. Dave, smiling, looks over at Jimmy, asking, "Where the hell did that crowbar come from?" "I found it over there when I landed when Steve threw me. No idea where my bat landed." I couldn't help but laugh. "You went flying like a rag doll, man." Jimmy, who was somehow still standing, shook his head. "Yeah, that was fucking intense, man. Like, the most intense." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the aftermath of our fight. The air hung heavy with the thick, metallic scent of blood, and the soft squelch of decimated zombie remains underfoot made my stomach churn. The three of us, caked in gore and bone fragments, were breathing hard, our bodies trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. "Shit," Dave muttered. wiping a chunk of flesh from his shirt, shaking his head in disbelief. I don't even know whose piece this is. Could be Steve's, could be the upstairs zombies, who the fuck knows? Hell, at this point it could be mine. I looked down at the mess we'd made of Steve's body. What was left of him didn't even resemble a person anymore, just a pile of meat, shattered bones, and leaking fluids. If anyone had told me a month ago I'd be smashing the brains of a 7-foot zombie janitor in the basement of a library, I'd have laughed in their face. Now it didn't even seem weird. We continued sneaking through the maze of the storage area, trying to keep our steps light and quiet. Every so often, a clang would echo out from one of us accidentally kicking a forgotten tool or knocking over a stray box, causing us all to freeze, wide-eyed, expecting a fresh wave of undead any second. It was during one of these moments of silence when it came. Only instead of a wave, it was only one. Lumbering at us from the long, dark aisle, its feet slapping against the concrete floor. "Come on, man," Dave breathed, his voice hoarse with disbelief. We just did this." The mindless monstrosity of wet-sounding flesh trudging toward us was a most unwelcome sight right now. I could barely raise my arms at this point. But there he was, a massive 300-pounder. Rushing in, he caught Dave with a swing of his crazed arms, sending him flying into a stack of crates like a wet sock. He groaned, dazed as a box fell on top of him. "Dave!" I shouted, ducking as he swung his other arm at me. I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me, but I scrambled to my feet just as Jimmy rushed forward, swinging his crowbar with all his might. It cracked against the big boy's skull with a sickening thwack, but the zombie didn't even flinch. "Shit, this guy's built like Steve," Jimmy yelled, backing up as it advanced on him. Lunging forward, I kicked its leg out from under it. Stumbling, it crashed down onto his belly, quickly trying to roll over. But before he could, Dave, regaining his bearings, charged forward. "Die already!" Dave screamed, bringing his bat down with a furious swing aimed at the back of its head. It crunched and caved in with a most horrid sound. Rolling over, it let out a thick, gurgling noise as it lay there looking up at us, its bloody face contorted into a grotesque grin, its body a heap of broken flesh and bone, twitching before finally going still. For a long moment, none of us moved. We stood there, panting, staring down at what was left of Steve and the other monstrosity, both gathered together like some nightmare of flesh and bone. The silence was broken by Dave, who leaned on his bat, exhausted, and muttered, "Next time, we aim for the head first." Jimmy, wiping blood off his glasses, snorted. "Roger that, good buddy." Surveying the scene caked in gore from head to toe, too tired to do anything but laugh. "Well," I said, collapsing onto the ground, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up to me. "At least we don't have to clock in for work tomorrow." Chapter 13. Through the Darkness. I woke up to the smell of decay, metallic and sour, lingering in the back of my throat. My body felt stiff, like I'd been laid out on a bed of rocks for hours. But as I blinked the haze away, the reality was worse. We were still in the basement. I shifted, and my hand brushed against something warm, sticky. I looked down and saw a dark, congealed mess. The remains of Steve and his basement sidekick. Their bodies, or what was left of them, was tangled around us. Bits of flesh and gore caked into our clothes. "Shit," I muttered, sitting up, trying to shake off the nightmare we had just survived. But the heaviness was still there, clinging like a second skin. Beside me, Dave stirred, rubbing his guts. "Tell me we didn't just nap in a pile of zombie guts?" "Afraid so," I groaned, pulling myself out of the mess and wiping my hands on my jeans, though it didn't help much. Blood and grime coated everything. Jimmy, half buried under Steve's mangled arm, opened his eyes and groaned. "Did we seriously fall asleep here? How long were we out?" I ran a hand through my hair, which was sticky with who knows what, before smirking. I guess the day catches up to you when you're bashing in skulls left and right. So, anyone else dream about something other than zombies for once? Jimmy shot me a deadpan look. Oh sure, I dreamt about rainbows and sunshine. Except instead of rainbows, it was intestines. He paused and kicked a rib bone aside. Real pleasant. Don't start, Dave groaned, picking a strip of muscle off his bat. We've been in this basement so long it's starting to feel like home. Let's just get out of here. I nodded. All right, let's regroup and get moving. We're wasting time standing around here in a pile of corpses. We gathered ourselves, brushing off what we could, though really there was no salvaging our clothes at this point, and started moving again. The dark, gloomy basement felt like it stretched on forever. Shelves, crates, and old boxes stacked high as far as the eye could see, some nearly collapsing with their contents spilling out into the aisles. Dust swirled through the air with each step, coating the back of our throats. As we moved, Jimmy trailed his hand along the old metal shelves, glancing over at us every few minutes. You think anyone else made it, like out of town? Or the harbor? Hell if I know, I said, stepping around what looked like an ancient floor buffer left behind. I'd be surprised if anyone's left in this town. With how many zombies we've already run into, it's not looking good. Great, Jimmy mumbled. This is just great. We're stuck in some old-school horror movie plot, but it's our lives. I don't even get a cool soundtrack. Dave let out a snort. Cool soundtrack? What are we, walking to the beat of Michael Jackson's Thriller? He shook his head. I think at this point we're just improvising our way through this mess. I sighed. Keep it together, guys. The last thing we need is to get sloppy and end up like, well, Steve over there. I glanced around, but the basement was still cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the dim flashlight beams we'd abandoned earlier. No windows, no cracks in the walls to let in any hint of daylight. We could have been out for hours, or minutes. There was no way to tell. How long do you think we were out? Jimmy asked. No clue, I said, trying to shake off the cobwebs in my brain. My body protested every step in exhaustion, every muscle aching. But we need to get out of here, and I don't want to wait for any more of Steve's basement butt buddies to show up. We collected our weapons, still caked in flesh and blood. Gathering ourselves together, we moved on into the darkness. There was no plan, no real direction to go in, just the nagging need to get the hell out of this nightmare. Maybe we missed something in the back? Dave suggested, nodding toward the far end of the basement. That service store's got to be here somewhere. I mean, it's a library, and it's huge. They've got to have deliveries. Worth a shot, I said, waving my flashlight. The beam bounced off old boxes and shelves as we wove through the narrow aisles. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards above us. Even down here, the faint groans and shuffles of zombies up on the first floor seemed to seep into the walls. After what felt like an eternity of searching, we stumbled upon it, a large metal roll-up door. It loomed over us, easily 12 feet tall, the kind you'd see at the back of a warehouse or behind a grocery store where trucks unload. Well, there's your service door, Jimmy muttered, running his fingers over the rusted metal. Only problem is this thing's gonna be loud as fuck. No kidding, Dave said, stepping back and giving it a once-over. We roll this thing up, every zombie on the block's gonna come running. We stood there, staring at the door like it was a ticking time bomb. The thing was massive, probably weighed a ton, and rolling it up was bound to make enough noise to alert the whole city. But the alternative was doubling back through the basement, trying to find a way back up to the first floor. And we already knew what was waiting for us up there. Zombies. A lot of them. Jimmy shook his head. We go back through the main floors, we're dead. No way around that, but this? He tapped the door. At least here we've got a shot. But the noise, I started. Loud as hell, Dave agreed. But then he grinned. Unless we just open it enough to slip through. I blinked at him. What? Think about it, Dave continued. We don't need to roll the whole damn door up, just enough to shimmy under. It'll be less noise, less attention, and we'll be out of here before they even know what hit 'em." Jimmy mulled it over. "Risky, but better than getting trapped inside." I nodded. "Okay, we do it." Together, we crouched low, gripping the bottom of the steel door, careful to lift it just an inch at a time. The metal screeched in protest, the sound echoing through the basement like nails on a chalkboard. My heart pounded, every scrape making me wince, but we kept at it, lifting it just high enough to squeeze under. Jimmy was the first to slide through, his thin frame just barely fitting beneath the gap. I followed next, feeling the cold concrete scrape against my back as I shimmied out. Dave came last, sucking in his gut to fit under the door before it closed behind us with a soft clunk. We were out. The alley behind the library was narrow, lined with dumpsters and trash bags, but at least we were out of that basement hell. The air smelled fresher, even if it was tinged with rot. "We're close now," Dave said, glancing to where the alley curved toward the harbor in the distance. "If we stick to the alley, we can make it to the harbor without running into any more of those freaks." Jimmy, ever the optimist, added, "And if we keep heading this way, we'll end up downtown. You know what that means, right?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "What?" Jimmy grinned and started singing. "Making my way downtown, walking fast, faces past, and I—" "Shut the fuck up, man!" Dave cut him off, shoving him playfully. "Now is not the time." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Soon enough, we were all laughing, even in the face of the absolute shit show our lives had become. For a moment, it was almost normal. That is, until we turned the corner. Standing there was at least 10 zombies, a grotesque horde blocking our path. They were ragged, some missing chunks of flesh, others covered in dried blood. Their eyes locked on us, and for a second, there was nothing but stillness. Then they charged. "Fuck!" I yelled, swinging my pipe as the first one lunged at me. The pipe connected with its skull, a sickening crack splitting the air as its head caved in. Blood sprayed across my face, hot and thick, but there was no time to react. Dave was already in the fray, his bat swinging with brutal precision. He brought it down on the nearest zombie's shoulder, the bone shattering with a loud snap. The creature wailed, stumbling back, but Dave didn't stop. He followed up with another swing, crushing its skull into a bloody pulp. Jimmy, ever the wild card, came in from the side, wielding his crowbar like a madman. He swung wildly, smashing the sharp end into a zombie's neck, severing its head in a spray of gore. The body staggered for a moment before collapsing, headless, at his feet. The alley became a whirlwind of chaos. The smell of rotting flesh and fresh blood filled the air, mixing with the sounds of bones breaking and bodies hitting the ground. Every swing, every strike, was met with a sickening thud or crack. It was a dance of death, each of us moving in sync, tearing through the horde like our lives depended on it. And they did. One zombie grabbed my arm, its decaying fingers digging into my skin. I twisted, bringing the pipe down on its wrist with a sharp crunch. Its hand went limp, but its mouth still snapped at me, teeth gnashing inches from my face. I kicked it back, sending it sprawling into the wall, then finished it off with a brutal swing to the head. Dave was fighting two at once, dodging and weaving as they tried to corner him. He swung his bat low, taking out the legs of one, then brought it up in a brutal uppercut, smashing the second zombie's jaw clean off. Blood sprayed across the alley as the creature's body went limp, crumpling to the ground. Jimmy, meanwhile, had gone full berserker mode, his crowbar slashing through the air with reckless abandon. He caught one zombie in the side of the head, the impact sending it spinning. Another lunged at him, but he ducked low, jamming the sharp end of his crowbar into its gut and twisting. The creature let out a gurgling wail before collapsing in a heap. The last zombie stood in front of me, its rotting face twisted into a grotesque grin. I didn't hesitate. I swung my pipe with everything I had left, feeling the crunch of bone and cartilage as it connected with its skull. The zombie's head snapped to the side, neck breaking with a sickening pop. It dropped to the ground, twitching once before going still. We stood there, panting, covered in blood and gore, the alley now littered with the broken bodies of the undead. "Well," Dave said, wiping the blood from his face. "That was fun." Jimmy grinned, still catching his breath. "You know, we're getting pretty good at this shit." I shook my head, laughing despite the carnage around us. "Don't get cocky just yet. After all, we still have the horde near the docks to get past." Chapter 14. Into the Maze of Nightmares. We moved silently, darting from alley to alley, the city a labyrinth of crumbling buildings and shattered streets. The air was thick with decay, and the distant moans of the undead echoed off the walls. I held the pipe tight in my hand, its weight reassuring, even though I knew it wouldn't be enough if we ran into another horde. Not like last time. We were running on fumes now, the fight from earlier still fresh in our minds. Dave's aluminum bat glinted in the faint light as he crouched low, signaling for us to follow. His face was set in a mask of concentration, eyes scanning the narrow alley ahead. Jimmy, his crowbar slung over his shoulder, was right behind me. We moved quickly, hearts pounding in our chests, but quietly. Oh, so quietly. The tension was suffocating, like the air itself was waiting to explode with violence. The city was a dead zone, but not in the peaceful way you'd hope. It was the kind of quiet that buzzed with dread, where any sound could signal the end of everything. As we rounded a corner, I could hear the distant shuffling of feet. Zombies, somewhere nearby. My breath caught in my throat. We pressed ourselves against the wall of a brick building, hearts pounding, barely daring to breathe. I peered around the corner. A pack of them, maybe a dozen. Too many to fight head-on, especially after the beating we took earlier. "Shit," I whispered. Jimmy edged closer, his eyes wide, sweat dripping down his temple. "How do we get past them?" he muttered under his breath, voice trembling with tension. "Fence," Dave whispered back, pointing to the chain-link fence at the far end of the alley. It was rusty, the kind of thing that would squeal like a dying animal if you weren't careful. But it was our only shot. If we could get over it without making a sound, we'd be clear. I nodded to Dave, and we moved quickly, darting from shadow to concrete shadow, crouching low. The zombies were oblivious for now, but it felt like at any second, one of them would catch a whiff of us, turn around, and scream that unholy sound that always sent chills down my spine. We reached the fence, and one by one, we climbed. I went first, feeling the metal rattle under my hands, praying it wouldn't give us away. My feet hit the ground on the other side, and I froze, waiting. Nothing. No sound. Dave was next, and then Jimmy. We all dropped down into the narrow gap between two buildings. For a moment, we just stood there, our backs against the wall, listening to the undead shuffle on the other side of the fence, none the wiser to our escape. My heart was hammering, and I could see the same panic in Dave's eyes as he glanced at me. "Let's keep moving," I whispered. We slipped further into the maze of the city, avoiding the main streets. Everything felt wrong. The world had gone to shit, and it felt like we were the last 3 people alive. The alleys were narrow and claustrophobic, hemmed in by tall buildings with broken windows watching us like empty eyes. Every time we turned a corner, my stomach twisted in fear, waiting for the inevitable, a horde ready to tear us apart. We leaped over low fences, ducked under half-collapsed scaffolding, and kept to the shadows. But the deeper we went, the more the city felt alive with the dead. The moaning grew louder, the occasional sharp scream of a zombie in the distance sending chills down my spine. We reached another alley, this one wider, more open. As I stepped forward, Jimmy's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "Wait," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced down the alley. More of them. A lot more. The pack was bigger now, at least 20 or 30 of them, wandering aimlessly in the street ahead. We couldn't go forward. Shit, Dave breathed, his knuckles white around the bat. We backed up, trying to find another way. My pulse raced, fear gnawing at my gut. Then it happened. Jimmy slipped. His foot caught on a piece of broken concrete, and he stumbled, his crowbar clattering against the ground. The sound rang out like gunshot. For a moment, everything was still. And then the horde turned. Go, go, go! I yelled, grabbing Jimmy and yanking him to his feet. We bolted down a side alley, running like hell as the sound of the zombies grew louder, the clatter of their feet slapping against the concrete. The alley was a dead end. I glanced at the fence, this one taller, with razor wire strung across the top. We couldn't climb it. The only way out was under a small gap at the base of the fence, barely wide enough to crawl through. "Jimmy, get under there!" I shouted, pushing him toward the gap. He dropped to his stomach, shimmying under the fence just as the first zombie rounded the corner, its decayed face twisted in hunger. Dave and I dove after him, just barely squeezing through before the horde reached us. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I grabbed Jimmy by the arm and pulled him to his feet. "Keep moving!" Dave barked, eyes wild with adrenaline. But as we scrambled forward, the worst happened. Jimmy fell behind. One wrong turn, 1 second too slow, and suddenly he was cut off. "Jimmy!" I screamed, turning back just in time to see the horde moving between us like a living wall of death. They hadn't seen him yet. He was crouched behind a dumpster, his breathing shallow, eyes wide with fear. Dave and I froze, pressed against the side of the building, hearts in our throats. They were in between us now, a thick wall of zombies, shuffling aimlessly. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see him, that somehow, by some miracle, they'd keep moving. But then, one of them turned. It was a slow, sickening moment as the thing's dead eyes locked onto Jimmy. For a heartbeat, it was silent. And then it let out a gurgling scream. The horde exploded into motion. "Run, Jimmy!" I screamed. But it was too late. There were too many of them. They swarmed toward him like a flood, angry and fast. "Fuck," Dave cursed, eyes wide. "We have to help him." I didn't even think. We charged forward, smashing into the back of the horde, swinging our weapons with everything we had. The pipe cracked against skulls, blood spattering as I swung again and again. Dave was beside me, his bat a blur of motion as he took down one zombie after another, trying to create a distraction. Some of the horde turned, drawn to us now, their dead eyes gleaming with hunger. But it wasn't enough. Jimmy was still trapped, dodging and weaving between the undead, his crowbar flashing as he fought for his life. "We can't hold them off forever," I shouted, swinging the pipe again and sending another zombie crumpling to the ground. "We just need to give him enough time," Dave yelled back, his voice strained. But there were too many. We fought off a few, then turned and ran, hoping to draw some of them away. I could hear them behind us, their snarls growing louder as they gave chase. My lungs burned, legs aching as we sprinted through the streets, ducking into another alley, trying to lose them. But Jimmy was still back there. "We have to go back," I gasped, chest heaving as we reached a gas station. We ducked inside, hiding behind the counter as I peeked out the window, scanning the streets for any sign of him. "Shit, man, we gotta help Jimmy." Dave nodded, eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, but how? Those things were all over him." I clenched my fists, trying to think. We couldn't leave him. I wouldn't leave him. "We go around," I said, my voice hard. "We cut through the city, find another way to reach him before they do." Dave swallowed hard, but he nodded. Let's do it. We slipped out of the gas station, sticking to the shadows as we made our way deeper into the city. Every corner, every alley was a gamble, but we moved quickly, hearts pounding, desperate to reach Jimmy before it was too late. And then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of zombies feeding. Oh no, I whispered, my stomach twisting in fear. We ran toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest, terror clawing at my throat. When we reached the corner, I stopped, pressing my back against the wall. I could hear them, ripping, tearing, the sound of flesh being torn apart. No, I muttered, shaking my head. It can't be him. It can't be. Dave's face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. I forced myself to look, peeking around the corner, expecting the worst. And then I froze. That's not Jimmy. It was one of their own. Exhaling deeply, my body sagging with relief, when from behind us came a voice. What are you guys looking at? I nearly jumped out of my skin, spinning around with the pipe raised, ready to strike. But there, standing behind us with a smirk plastered across his face, was Jimmy. He was covered in dirt and sweat, his crowbar slung casually over his shoulder like it was just another day at the office. Holy shit, Jimmy! I gasped, lowering the pipe, my heart still hammering in my chest. We thought you were dead, man! Jimmy just grinned, wiping a smear of grime from his forehead. Dead? Nah, I'm way too pretty to die like that. Those things never even got close. Dave let out a shaky breath, the tension draining from his body. You son of a bitch, he muttered, though there was relief in his voice. You scared the hell out of us. Jimmy shrugged, still grinning like he just pulled off the greatest prank in history. Had to keep you guys on your toes, right? I couldn't help but laugh, the sound shaky and hysterical as the adrenaline from the last few minutes finally started to wear off. You're a goddamn lunatic, you know that? Yeah, well, we're all a little crazy these days, Jimmy said, glancing past me at the horde of zombies still tearing into one of their own. So, what's the plan now? We're not going to sit here and watch them have lunch, are we? I shook my head, wiping the sweat from my brow as I tried to regain control of my breathing. No, we need to get the hell out of here before they realize we're not on the menu. Dave nodded, already moving back toward the alley. Let's go. The longer we stay, the more likely they'll catch our scent. We fell into a tense silence as we made our way through the maze of streets, every sound making me jump, every shadow a potential threat. The city was a graveyard, and we were trespassers, moving through it like rats in a maze. For now, we were alive. But I knew, deep down, that luck wasn't going to keep us that way forever. As we slipped back into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Chapter 15. The Return to Darkness. Part 1. Memories. The city was quiet in a way that made your skin crawl. The only sounds were the occasional moan of a distant zombie or the hollow, echoing footsteps of the three of us as we wove through the alleys. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every corner hiding some potential horror waiting to leap out at us. We were deep into the heart of this dead place, far from the harbor, from the docks, from the fleeting hope of escape we clung to. I wiped the sweat from my brow, the pipe still clenched tightly in my hand. Jimmy was beside me, his crowbar resting on his shoulder, eyes darting around for any sign of movement. Dave walked slightly ahead, his aluminum bat dragging along the concrete with a soft metallic scrape. He hadn't said much since we'd left the gas station behind, his face set in a hard, grim expression. After what felt like hours of wandering through the crisscrossed alleys and side streets, Dave finally broke the silence. I know a way out of here, he muttered, his voice low but steady. It's not the fastest, but it's the safest. Jimmy and I both glanced at him, grateful to finally have some kind of direction. "Where's it lead?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from betraying how tired I was. My legs ached from the constant running, my muscles tight and sore. Every nerve in my body screamed for a break, but I knew we couldn't stop. Not here, not now. Dave hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It's past my old stepdad's place. There's something I need to get from there before we go. After that, we cut straight across town to the docks." I frowned. "Your stepdad's place? Are you sure it's worth it? We don't have time for detours, man." Dave's face darkened, a storm cloud of emotions flickering across his features. "It's worth it," he said, his voice firm. "Trust me." I didn't push him further, though I could tell from the way his jaw was clenched that this wasn't up for debate. Jimmy and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us said anything more. As we walked, Dave started talking again, his voice low and almost distant, like he was pulling the words from a place he didn't want to revisit. "When my real dad died, I was 16, Dave said, not looking at either of us. "He wasn't around much before then, but when he was a good guy, you know? Always made me feel like I was worth something. He had this ring, passed down from his father and his father before that. It's been in our family for 3 generations. It was supposed to come to me." Dave paused for a second, his eyes hardening as he spoke. "But then my mom remarried this piece of shit, a guy named Jerry, a fucking drunk, violent, abusive, the kind of guy who'd knock back a 6-pack before noon and then spend the rest of the day finding excuses to beat the hell out of anything that moved." His voice cracked slightly. "Especially me." I swallowed hard, not sure if I should say something or just let him talk. Jimmy had gone quiet too, his usual light-hearted banter replaced by a respectful silence. "When my dad died, I thought, at least, I'd get that ring. Something to remember him by, you know? Something that connected me to the man who actually gave a damn about me." Dave's grip tightened on the aluminum bat. "But Jerry, he took it. Said it belonged to him now, 'cause he was the man of the house." Dave scoffed bitterly. "That bastard wore it every day, like some kind of badge of honor. Like he'd earned it. Even when he was knocking me around, he'd wear it. The last time he hit me was when I was 17. He wore that ring the whole time, cracking me in the face with it over and over. Left me with a busted nose and a scar I'll carry for the rest of my life." He trailed off, the weight of the memories pressing down on him like a heavy stone. For a long moment, none of us said anything. "That ring," Dave said, his voice thick with anger. "It's the only thing I have left from my dad, and I'm taking it back." I felt a lump in my throat, unsure of what to say. Jimmy just shook his head, his face tight with emotion. None of us could imagine what Dave had gone through, but hearing the pain in his voice, it was enough to make us want to follow him wherever he needed to go. We finally reached a nicer part of town, the kind that made me feel like I didn't belong. The houses were bigger, the lawns manicured, and despite everything, it looked like nothing had changed. No broken windows, no doors hanging off their hinges. Just eerie, quiet stillness. "That's it," Dave said, pointing to a 2-story house with a rusted, beat-up pickup truck parked out front. "See that stupid fucking truck? Jerry loved that more than anyone. If it wouldn't bring the whole goddamn block down on us, I'd blow it to hell." I glanced at the truck, then back at Dave. His face was hard, his eyes burning with hatred and hurt that had simmered for years. I could tell this was more than just about the ring. It was about everything Jerry had taken from him. His dignity, his peace of mind, his childhood. We moved cautiously toward the house, the silence thick around us. Dave was in the lead, his hand gripping the bat tightly, his knuckles white. Jimmy and I flanked him, keeping our eyes peeled for any sign of movement. As we approached the front door, Dave stopped, His breath came in shallow, ragged bursts, his hand trembling as it hovered over the doorknob. I could see the memories playing out behind his eyes, the ghosts of his past looming over him like a dark cloud. For a second, I thought he might not be able to do it, that he'd turn around and walk away, leaving that part of his life behind. But then, with a deep breath, Dave wrapped his fingers around the cold metal knob. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. Side by side, we stood at the threshold, ready to step into the house where Dave had faced years of abuse, ready to confront the past, ready to take back what was his. Part 2. A Reckoning in Blood. Opening the door, a gust of stale, musty air greeted us, the kind of smell that comes from a house left untouched for years. Dust floated lazily in the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, and the faint scent of spilled beer and old sweat still clung to the air. Dave pushed the door wider, his grip tight on the aluminum bat. I glanced at Jimmy, who was already eyeing the living room, his crowbar at the ready. The place looked abandoned, forgotten, like a relic from a life none of us could imagine Dave having to endure. We stepped inside cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath our weight. It felt wrong to be here, like we were trespassing on something deeply personal. The house was eerily silent, the quiet amplifying the tension that hung between us. Dave hadn't said a word since we crossed the threshold. He was in his own world now, his eyes scanning the space with a mixture of rage and nostalgia. Jimmy, ever curious, wandered over to an old cabinet, pulling open the drawers and sifting through dusty papers and faded photos. "Man," Jimmy said softly, holding up a picture to show me. It was of a much younger Dave, maybe 10 or 11, smiling awkwardly in front of a Christmas tree. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Look at you. It's been a long time since you were that kid, huh?" Dave didn't respond. He just stared at the picture for a moment before turning his back on it, heading deeper into the house. His silence was thick with meaning. We all knew this wasn't just a trip down memory lane. This was something more, something darker. "It's been, 15 years since you were last here?" I asked, trying to fill the void. Dave nodded absently, walking toward the hallway. "Yeah, something like that. Feels like a lifetime ago." His voice was distant, like he was speaking through the fog of old memories. He stopped suddenly, pointing to a corner in the hallway near the door to what I guessed was the living room. "Right there," he said, his voice low and rough. "Right fucking there is where that drunk bastard had me pinned down, kicking the shit out of me." Jimmy and I looked at the spot, a small indentation in the wall still visible where something had been smashed hard against it. Years of abuse carved into the very structure of the house. Dave's eyes were dark, his hand gripping the bat tighter. "I was just a kid, man. 9, maybe 10 years old. He had me down, kicking me full strength in the gut, the arms, the back, wherever his drunk foot landed." His voice cracked slightly, and the rawness of his pain filled the space between us. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't imagine the kind of hurt that he must have endured here, the memories he carried with him like scars on his soul. Jimmy stayed quiet too, rummaging through more drawers, occasionally glancing over at Dave, unsure if he should say something or just let him process it all. We moved slowly through the house, checking rooms, keeping our weapons ready. It seemed empty, but we knew better than to trust the silence. As we approached the back bedroom, the tension thickened. Dave stopped in his tracks, holding up his hand. A sound came from the far end of the hallway. Soft, rhythmic, a dull thump that echoed through the stillness of the house. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from Dave's old bedroom, his childhood room, the one he hadn't set foot in for over a decade. "Shh," Dave whispered, his eyes narrowing. He motioned for us to stay behind as he crept down the hallway, his steps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Jimmy and I followed closely, every muscle in my body on edge, my grip tightening on the pipe. The door to his bedroom was the last one on the left, slightly ajar, the noise louder now. Thump, thump, thump. Dave reached the door, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the knob, turning it as slowly as he could. It didn't make a sound, not even a creak. He pushed the door open, just enough to peer inside. We stood behind him, holding our breath, hearts pounding. There, in the corner of the room, stood Jerry, Dave's stepdad. He was hunched over, his back to us, slowly bumping his head against the wall. Thump, thump, thump. His head lolled slightly with each hit, like he was stuck in some kind of grotesque, mindless rhythm. The once strong, imposing figure Dave had described to us was now a shell, his clothes hanging loose on his emaciated frame, his skin pale and sickly. He was in some kind of zombie daze, unaware of our presence. Dave didn't move for a moment, just stood there, staring at the man who had tormented him for years. His face was unreadable, but I could feel the weight of it all drifting through the air. "This one's for me," Dave whispered, glancing back at us with a look that told us to stay where we were. I opened my mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped me. I nodded silently, gripping my pipe as Jimmy and I stayed behind, watching as Dave stepped into the room. "Be careful, man," I whispered, but I knew he wasn't hearing me anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere deep inside his mind, reliving every punch, every kick, every moment of pain he had suffered at the hands of this man. Dave took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the bat as he looked around the room. His old room. It hadn't changed. Posters on the wall, faded sheets on the bed, comics and old books scattered in the corner like they'd been left there just yesterday. His gaze lingered for a moment on everything, taking it all in, before his eyes settled on Jerry. And then, with a voice filled with years of bottled-up rage, he said, "Hey, Jerry, I'm home." Jerry didn't respond. He just kept thumping his head against the wall. Thump, thump, thump. Dave raised the bat. The first swing came down with a sickening crack against the back of Jerry's head, sending a spray of blood and gore across the wall. Jerry didn't even have time to react before the next swing came, and the next, and the next, each one fueled by years of hatred, each one releasing a torrent of pain that Dave had held inside for far too long. "You fucking piece of shit!" Dave screamed, his voice shaking with fury. "This is for every goddamn time you hit me, for every time you made me feel worthless, for every bruise, every scar, every goddamn night I wished I was dead." The bat came down again and again, blood splattering the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Jerry's body crumpled to the ground, but Dave didn't stop. He kept swinging, each hit more brutal than the last, until there was nothing left but a mangled, bloody mess where his stepfather's head had once been. Jimmy and I stood frozen, watching the carnage unfold, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part of me figured this was something Dave needed to do for Dave. He needed this closure, no matter how bloody or violent it was. "Dave?" I whispered, stepping forward cautiously. "Dave, it's done, man. You got him." But Dave didn't hear me. He kept swinging, his face contorted with rage and pain, screaming at Jerry's lifeless body. It wasn't until Jimmy stepped forward, grabbing Dave's arm, that he finally stopped. "Dave, it's over," Jimmy said softly. "You did it, man. He's gone." Dave stood there, panting heavily, his chest heaving, the bat still clenched tightly in his blood-covered hand. His eyes were wild, his whole body shaking. Slowly, he let the bat fall from his grip, clattering to the floor with a dull thud. We stood there in the silence that followed, the three of us breathing heavily, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us. Dave was covered in blood. Jerry's blood. His own hands trembling as he stared down at the mess he had made. Jimmy pointed to the ground, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that it?" I looked down and saw it. Jerry's hand, still twitching slightly in the last throes of death, the ring glinting on his finger. "I'll be damned," Dave muttered, his voice hollow. He knelt down, his hands still shaking, and slid the ring off Jerry's cold, lifeless finger. For a moment, he just stared at it, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. Without a word, Dave walked out of the room and into the kitchen. We followed him silently, watching as he turned on the faucet, washing the blood from the ring. His hands were still shaking as he dried it off and slipped it onto his own finger. He held it up for us to see, the faintest glimmer of relief in his eyes. "Finally," he whispered. We stood there for a moment, the air thick with tension, before Jimmy clapped him on the back. "It's yours now, man. Like it should have been all along." Dave didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said enough. For a moment, none of us spoke. The quiet settled back into the house like a heavy fog, but it wasn't the same as before. There was a different kind of silence now, a silence filled with exhaustion, relief, and the bitter satisfaction of a long-awaited reckoning. The room felt colder, the walls seeming to press in closer. Or maybe it was just that the weight of what had happened was starting to catch up with us. Dave stood in the kitchen, still staring at the ring on his finger. He ran his thumb over the surface, wiping away the last of the blood, and I could see the gears turning in his head. This wasn't just a piece of jewelry to him. It was a symbol, a reminder of everything he'd endured, and everything he'd overcome in this place. Jimmy was the first to break the silence. "You good, man?" Dave didn't answer right away. He just kept looking at the ring, his breathing slowly returning to normal. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm good." Jimmy and I exchanged a glance. We had to keep moving. "We should check the rest of the place," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "Make sure there's nothing else here that we can use." Jimmy, ever the practical one, started opening cupboards and drawers in the kitchen, looking for supplies. He rifled through cans of old food, pulling out anything that looked remotely edible. "This stuff looks old, but better than nothing," he muttered, tossing cans of beans and soup onto the counter. As Jimmy worked, Dave wandered back into the hallway, back towards the crumpled mess of a stepfather he left in the bedroom. Reaching into the closet, he pulled out his old backpack and brought it into the kitchen, loading it up with the canned food. "Found some batteries," Jimmy said, holding up a pack triumphantly. "And a couple of flashlights. These will come in handy if we have to make a run in the dark." I nodded, grateful for the practicality of it all. We needed supplies. We needed to be prepared for whatever was coming next. And the truth was, we couldn't afford to waste any more time in this house. "Anything else?" I asked, glancing around the kitchen. Jimmy shrugged, tossing a flashlight to me. "Not much else worth taking. Most of this is junk or too old to be useful." Dave was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the grass. "We should go," I said quietly, stepping closer to him. "There's nothing left for us here." Dave didn't respond right away, but eventually he nodded. He turned away from the window, glancing around the house one last time. "Yeah," he muttered. "Let's go." We gathered up what little we'd found, some food, the flashlights, and the batteries, and made our way back to the front door. As we stepped outside, the cool evening air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of what had just happened. The street was empty, silent, as if the world outside hadn't changed at all while we'd been inside. Dave lingered on the porch for a moment, his eyes scanning the street. He was still wearing the ring, the blood washed away, but the significance of it clear in his posture. It was his now, a final piece of his past that he could reclaim, a piece of his father. Jimmy clapped him on the shoulder as we started down the street, heading back toward the car. "How about we go find us some more zombies to bash up there, slugger?" he said quietly. Dave, smiling, agreed. We walked in silence for a while, the sun dipping lower behind the horizon. The world felt different now, quieter, darker, more dangerous. And as we made our way back to whatever came next, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. Chapter 16. Bomb Pops and Bloodbaths. The sun hung low, casting an eerie golden glow over the desolate city as we turned the corner onto Raymond Drive, a quaint little part of town. It was quiet. Too quiet, aside from the distant hum of buzzing flies and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The buildings, once filled with life, now stood hollow and broken, like the bones of some great beast long dead. Then we saw it. An ice cream truck sat parked haphazardly in the middle of the street, its front end skewed at an awkward angle, as if the driver had just given up, or worse. Bodies were strewn about the ground like discarded toys, blood smeared across the asphalt in grotesque patterns. But there was something surreal about seeing that brightly colored truck, its cheerful decals of cartoon ice cream cones and popsicles grinning back at us, completely at odds with the carnage surrounding it. Jimmy stopped dead in his tracks, tilting his head like a dog who just heard the word treat. "You know what I could really go for right now?" "What?" I asked, already knowing where this was headed. Jimmy grinned, motioning toward the truck. "Ice cream. How about you guys? Feels like a perfect day for it." Dave snorted, but the hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I could go for a little cold refreshment. Been too long." "Hell yeah," I chuckled. "A bomb pop would really hit the spot." As we approached, stepping over the broken bodies in our path, the humor felt almost wrong, like laughing at a funeral. But at this point, the world had gone so insane that you either laughed or you lost it. Dave, with that dark sense of humor he was known for, pointed at one of the more gruesome corpses lying in a pool of blood. The body's mangled limbs were twisted, a red smear across the pavement. "Look at that," Dave said, poking me in the side. "There's your bomb pop right there." "Asshole," I shoved him, grinning despite the scene. The ice cream truck's side door was already open, revealing the interior where the vendor had once stood, handing out sugary joy to eager kids. Now the place looked abandoned, but untouched, like a relic of a time when the biggest problem was deciding between a fudge pop and a choco taco. Climbing inside, I glanced around. I always wondered what went on back here behind that little window. It's like the wizard behind the curtain or something. Rummaging around in the cooler, Jimmy whistled. "You guys won't believe this, but the ice cream's still frozen. Must have been some kind of backup power." Dave reached in, pulling out a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle ice pop. Its green head was slightly wonky, one gumball eye dangling from the side, but it was still recognizable. "Donatello's seen better days," Dave said with a grin, peeling back the wrapper. Jimmy grabbed a strawberry shortcake bar, unwrapping it with a reverence normally reserved for priceless artifacts. "This," he said, holding it up, "is what civilization was built on." But me? I found it, the holy grail of frozen treats. There, nestled in the corner, was a perfect, pristine bomb pop, the red, white, and blue monolith of nostalgia gleaming in the dim light like a beacon of hope. "Gentlemen," I said, holding it up for them to see, "I present to you the most beautiful bomb pop I've ever seen. I don't care if it's the apocalypse. This thing is glorious." We leaned against the metal shelves inside the truck, savoring the moment. For a few minutes, everything else faded away. The blood, the bodies, the walking dead. All that mattered was the cool, sweet taste of ice cream on our tongues. The world was ending, but for this brief, stupidly perfect second, it didn't matter. Dave was the first to break the silence, pointing at the mess of melting ice cream running down Jimmy's chin. "You two look like kids at a birthday party," he laughed. Before I could respond, Jimmy shifted to the side, and that's when it happened. Click. The truck's speakers blared to life, and suddenly the familiar chime of Pop Goes the Weasel rang out into the deathly quiet street, loud and jarring as hell. "Shit!" Jimmy yelped, frantically trying to flip the switch back off. "I must have hit one of these buttons." But it was too late. The song kept playing, the cheerful melody slicing through the tension, mocking the dead silence we'd just been enjoying. And that's when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of groaning and shuffling feet. The ice cream truck's music wasn't the only thing filling the air. Somewhere, close enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up, the undead had heard it too. "God damn it, Jimmy," Dave hissed, grabbing his bat. "We gotta move, now." Even through the blaring music, we could hear them coming. The low, guttural moans, the unmistakable scrape of feet dragging across the asphalt. "That many groans means a horde," I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. Without a second thought, we slipped out of the truck, darting toward the nearby house across the street. We dipped through a side yard, hopping a fence, and found ourselves in the backyard of a house with a huge in-ground swimming pool, the crisp blue water sparkling in the fading light. For a moment, the chaos faded again. Jimmy, always the one to lighten the mood, grinned as we stood at the edge of the pool. "That music should keep them busy long enough for a quick dip, don't you think? We could use it. Clean off some of the past few days' gore." The water looked so inviting, so perfect. For a second, it was like we weren't running for our lives. "I'm in," I said, without hesitation. Without another word, we eased into the pool, trying not to make too much noise. The cool water a shock to the system after so much blood and grime. I swam to the bottom, feeling the weight of everything wash away for a moment. It was almost peaceful down there. The sounds of the world above muffled by the water, the chaos and death temporarily out of reach. I mimicked a washing machine, swirling around, scrubbing away days of dirt and blood. When I surfaced, gasping for air, I saw Dave and Jimmy floating nearby, their faces finally relaxed. For just a minute, it felt like the world wasn't completely fucked. But then I looked back at the water. The once clear, crisp blue was now clouded, tinged a dark, sickly red. Chunks of grime and filth floated on the surface, a reminder of just how far from normal things had gotten. Dave climbed out first, glancing back at the mess we'd left in the pool. "Well," he said with a laugh, "that's one way to ruin a perfectly good swimming pool." We all stood there for a moment, dripping wet and staring at the now blood-streaked water. Then, without another word, we grabbed our gear and kept moving, heading toward the harbor, toward the horde of dead that surely awaited us. The brief respite was over. It was time to face the real world again. Chapter 17. Shuckin' and Jivin'. The streets stretched ahead of us like a maze, lined with the debris of a world gone mad. Buildings slumped, their windows shattered, doors hanging loose on hinges, as if they too had given up on holding out against the dead. The sky had turned an ominous shade of gray, the sun hiding behind thick clouds, casting the city in a heavy, oppressive gloom. Every corner seemed to hide the promise of death, the groaning of the undead echoing off crumbling brick walls and abandoned cars. But we kept moving, ducking, weaving, shucking and jiving past the dead like prize fighters in the ring. Our clothes, still damp from the pool, clung to our skin. The once refreshing cool now heavy and uncomfortable. But at least we weren't completely caked in blood and gore. For now, we had to stay sharp, stay clean, keep our heads clear. Ahead of us, a narrow alleyway stretched out, choked with the remains of old trash bags and overturned dumpsters. We darted through it, slipping past a few wandering corpses who didn't even see us. They were slow, sluggish, heads lolling to one side as if they hadn't the energy to lift them anymore. Easy enough to avoid for now. But then, as we emerged onto the next block, we heard it. A soft, desperate sound that stopped me in my tracks. A high-pitched meow cut through the stillness, fragile and fearful, but there. A heartbeat in the dead air. "What the hell was that?" Dave whispered, clutching his bat, scanning the area. We followed the sound around the corner, and that's when I saw it. Up in a twisted old oak tree, clinging to a branch for dear life, was a small tabby cat, its fur puffed up in terror. Below it, 2 zombies stood, swaying on their feet, their rotting hands reaching upward like ghoulish supplicants. Their cloudy eyes were locked on the cat, jaws working open and closed as if they could already taste the little creature's flesh. I clenched my pipe, feeling a surge of protectiveness for the helpless little fella. "Can't leave Kitty to go out like this," I muttered. "We're saving him." Jimmy gave me a look like I was insane for risking our necks for a cat, but I didn't care. Dave just nodded, gripping his bat tighter. "Let's crack some skulls." We moved in quickly, circling the zombies from behind. They were too focused on the cat to notice us until it was too late. I brought my iron kitty protector down hard on the first one's head, the satisfying crunch of bone shattering beneath the blow, filling the air. Dave followed up with a vicious swing, his bat connecting with the second zombie's skull, caving it in like a rotten melon. The 2 corpses dropped like sacks of meat, collapsing into grotesque heaps on the ground. The cat, still up in the tree, let out a curious little chirp before hopping down to the grass, landing with an elegant thump. It was a small thing, its fur a patchwork of warm browns and oranges with black streaks running like tiger stripes across its back. Its emerald eyes gleamed with a mix of gratitude and curiosity as it padded over to me, tail raised high, twitching at the tip. "Hey there, little guy," I whispered, crouching down as the cat rubbed its head against my leg, purring like a tiny engine. It looked up at me with those wide green eyes, a soft meow escaping its lips. I reached down and scratched under its chin, feeling the rumble of its purr vibrate through my hand. For a second, just a brief moment, everything felt normal. The world wasn't ending, and I wasn't standing in a street littered with the dead. It was just me and this cat, like the universe had paused to give us this small, tender moment of peace. "You're a good little kitty, aren't you?" I murmured, giving it one last scratch. "Stay safe out there." The cat purred again, nuzzling my hand before prancing off, tail held high like a little banner of triumph. As it disappeared down the block, I waved, a small smile tugging at my lips. "See you later, Mr. Kittles." But the moment was fleeting. The groans of the undead echoed down the street, pulling us back to reality. We had to keep moving. The harbor was close now. I could feel it. The scent of salt water was in the air, mixing with the rot and decay. The dead were everywhere, shambling out from behind cars and through broken windows, their lifeless eyes tracking us as we moved. We bobbed and weaved, slipping between alleyways, dodging the scattered zombies that wandered too close. They moved in packs now, herds of them, groaning and shuffling like one giant organism. It was only a matter of time before they caught our scent, before they realized we were fresh meat walking right into their territory. The main harbor street was just up ahead. I could see it, lined with old shops and boarded-up windows, the docks just beyond. But so were they. The horde of dead shitbags gathered thickly in the distance, their bodies crammed together like some grotesque wave waiting to crash down on us. We crouched behind an old delivery truck, catching our breath as we scoped out the situation. The dead were packed tight around the docks, swarming like ants at a picnic. There was no way we'd be able to just walk through them. We're gonna have to swing around, hit them from the left, and then cut across toward the docks, I said, keeping my voice low. Quick and clean. Jimmy nodded, tightening his grip on the crowbar. Quick and clean. Got it. Dave gave a grim smile. Fast and funky. I grinned, despite the dread pooling in my gut. Yeah, fast and funky. Busta Rhymes style. Dip in and get out, leaving him dazed and confused, bobbing and weaving. We slowly started chanting Busta lyrics, trying to hype ourselves up. On time, showing you the rhythm. As I get wrecking, get raw. Yeah, I be the man coming off that be raw. It's Busta Rhymes giving you much more so, yo. Laughing, jumping, and bumping into each other, the three of us shared a quick nod, hearts racing, the sound of the dead filling the air as we prepared ourselves for the next move. This was it, the final sprint to the docks. No more stops, no more distractions. We had to be fast, we had to be silent, and we had to survive. Chapter 18. The Dark Star Beckons. As we crouched in the alley, the moonlight bouncing off the water and casting eerie shadows on the buildings, I motioned toward the far side of the harbor. See that? That's where we need to go, the Dark Star Bar. It's right there on the right side of the boardwalk. If we can make our way around and under the boardwalk, we can slip past the horde and get to the boat docks. Dave raised an eyebrow, squinting through the grime on his face. You still trying to stop for that beer first? I grinned. Hell yeah, man. If the world's ending, we might as well go out thirst quenched. We get to the bar, grab a drink, do a little karaoke as a final fuck you to the dead, then make our escape. There's gotta be a boat with a working motor. We'll sail to freedom and laugh about all this in a week. Jimmy, still catching his breath, chuckled. You're nuts, man. But if it means a cold one and not getting eaten alive, I'm all in. We started making our way through the back alleys, sticking to the shadows. The fires that blazed around us cast long, distorted silhouettes on the ground, making every turn feel like we were walking through the set of a nightmare. Trash cans overturned, the smell of decay thick in the air, and the distant moans of the dead kept us moving fast but quiet. We're gonna have to loop around wide, I whispered. There's no way we're getting through that crowd at the harbor. We'll come at the boardwalk from the far side. Lead the way, fearless leader, Dave muttered, gripping his aluminum bat tight, eyes scanning the darkness. We crept through alleyways, ducking behind cars, darting from one corner to the next, hearts pounding with every step. I could see the Dark Star in the distance now, its neon sign flickering, barely visible in the chaos. It was still standing, and that was good enough for me. We were almost to the edge of the boardwalk when we heard it, a sound like footsteps, soft and slow. At first I thought maybe it was just another stray zombie, but then we turned the corner and froze. 4 zombies, all dressed like clowns. Their white face paint was smeared with blood, and their colorful outfits were torn and stained with gore. Red noses hung loosely from their disfigured faces, and one of them had a rainbow wig that was half burned off. They stood there, blocking the alley, their dead eyes locking onto us. I blinked, incredulous. Are you shitting me? The apocalypse interrupted the circus, and now we gotta fight the damn insane clown posse? Dave snorted, his grip tightening on his bat. Well, ain't that just the icing on the cake? One of the clowns, its mouth twisted into a grotesque, permanent grin, let out a low, gurgling growl and started shuffling toward us. Without missing a beat, I stepped forward, my trusty pipe in hand, grinning like an idiot. This here's my new weapon, I said, raising it high. The clown clocker. Jimmy burst out laughing, his voice echoing down the alley. The clown lunged at me, its red wig flopping as its decaying body reached out with stained glove hands. With a quick swing, I brought the clown clocker down on its head. There was a sickening crunch as its skull collapsed inward, the painted smile caving in on itself. Black blood splattered everywhere, but I couldn't stop laughing. One down, boys! Jimmy was next to me in a flash, swinging his bat low at another clown's legs. With a crunch that made my stomach turn, the zombie's kneecap bent backward, the bones snapping audibly. The thing went down in a heap, flailing wildly as it hit the ground. "Damn, that was nasty," I said, shaking my head. But Jimmy just grinned, wiping some blood off his cheek. The third clown came at Dave, its squeaky red nose honking with every jerky movement. Dave didn't hesitate. He slammed his bat into its gut, doubling it over, and then drove the butcher knife he'd been carrying straight into its temple. The clown crumpled to the ground, the once bright colors of its outfit now soaked in dark blood. "Strike 3, you're out," Dave quipped, yanking the knife free. The last one was on me in an instant, its grotesque face inches from mine. I could smell the rot on its breath, feel the cold, clammy skin of its hand as it reached for my throat. I swung the clown clocker with all my might, smashing it into the thing's chest. The pipe went straight through, the zombie's ribcage collapsing like wet cardboard as it fell backward in a heap. "This is for every clown that ever haunted my childhood nightmares," I muttered, wiping the blood off the pipe. Dave looking over at me, doing his best Captain Spaulding impression. "What's the matter, kid? Don't you like clowns? Aren't we fucking funny?" Jimmy let out a groan from the bad impression, his eyes wide. "Man, that was surreal. Fighting clowns in a goddamn apocalypse?" "Surreal's the word for it," I replied, shaking my head. "But hey, at least we got some entertainment on the way to the bar." We finished off the last of the clowns, their bodies a mangled mess at our feet, then made our way to the boardwalk. The path was clear, the distant sound of moaning zombies fading as we moved away from the horde. The Dark Star Bar and Grill stood just a block away, its faded sign still flickering in the dim light. A purple neon star and light bulb buzzed weakly above the entrance. We slipped inside, the air stale but surprisingly calm. For the first time in days, it felt like we could breathe. "I call bartender," I announced, hopping over the bar with a grin. Jimmy and Dave took seats at the counter as I started grabbing bottles from the shelves, dusting them off. "What'll it be, gents?" "Anything that'll help me forget about those goddamn clowns?" Jimmy said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Dave chuckled. "I'll take a beer, cold if you got it." I found a half-warm bottle of something, slid it across the counter with a flourish, then cracked open a whiskey bottle for myself. "To surviving another day in this hellhole," I said, raising my glass. "To the clown clocker," Jimmy added with a grin, raising his bat in salute. We laughed, toasting in the middle of an empty bar in the apocalypse. The world had gone to shit. Zombies were at the gates. But for a moment, we had cold beers, stupid jokes, and each other. And just outside, the boat docks waited. Chapter 19. The Last Ride Out. The soft hum of the jukebox and the Dark Star pub filled the silence as we sat nursing our drinks. The dark wood bar, chipped and worn from years of use, had a strange sense of peace about it, like it was the last sanctuary left in a world gone mad. But even that peace was fragile. The moaning of the hordes just outside, the occasional crash of glass or shuffling of feet, reminded us that we were on borrowed time. I sipped my whiskey, savoring the burn. "So, we all clear on the plan?" Jimmy leaned back in his chair, staring out the grimy window at the distant docks. "Yeah, I got it. Split up, each take a row of boats and find one with a motor, preferably with keys. We need the motor to get out of the dock, then we can switch to sails when we're out in the open water." Dave, always the more practical one, set down his beer. "And the boat's gotta have sails. We don't want to be stranded in the middle of the ocean running on fumes." I nodded. "Exactly. We need something that'll get us out of this harbor, but also keep us moving once we're out there. If the motor dies, we're done for." Jimmy stretched, cracking his knuckles. "All right, so what's the strategy? We sneak around like ninjas or go in loud and proud?" "Ninjas, obviously," I said with a grin. "But if shit hits the fan, and it probably will, we don't have time to be quiet. We take whatever we find and get the hell out. Dave stood, gripping his bat. Let's do this then. We don't have all night. With a final gulp of whiskey, we left the bar, slipping back out into the cold night. The docks were still, but the city beyond was anything but. Fires burned in the distance, lighting up the night sky in an orange haze. Zombies wandered in packs, aimless yet always moving. We moved like shadows, sticking to the edges of the boardwalk, keeping our eyes peeled for movement. The horde that had blocked our way earlier was still there, a black mass of bodies that groaned and shuffled, eager for the scent of fresh meat. Us. We reached the docks. Long rows of boats stretched out before us, each with its own wooden pier jutting out into the water. Some boats were old, rusted, and clearly hadn't been used in years. Others looked newer, sleeker, and more promising. But none of that mattered if we couldn't find one with keys, or at least a way to start it. I'll take this row, I whispered, pointing to the nearest set of boats. Jimmy, you take the middle, and Dave, you get the far row. Jimmy nodded, his face tense. We split up, find the boat, and signal each other. Keep it quiet. But if you find something, don't waste time. We need to get moving before that horde notices us. With that, we split off. The boardwalk creaked underfoot as I made my way down the narrow wooden pier. The boats were dark, their sails tied down, the occasional rope swinging lazily in the wind. I hopped onto the first boat, a small sailboat with peeling paint and a rusted anchor. I ducked into the cabin, frantically searching for keys or anything that might help. Nothing, just old charts and a half-empty bottle of rum. Damn. I tried the next one, and the next. Each time the results were the same. No keys, no way to start them. The boats all seemed abandoned, long forgotten by their owners in the chaos of the apocalypse. As I moved down the row, my heart pounded harder with each step. Time was running out. We needed to find a boat fast. The moans of the horde in the distance were growing louder, more frantic, as if they could sense we were planning to slip away. Suddenly, from the far row of boats, I saw Dave waving his arms. He had found something. I squinted, trying to see if he was signaling quietly or just flailing in panic. It was hard to tell in the low light, but he wasn't making any noise, so I took that as a good sign. I turned to look for Jimmy, who was one dock over on the side closer to the horde. No sign of him. A cold pit formed in my stomach. Shit, I muttered under my breath. I had to act quickly. I darted over to Dave's dock, running as fast as I could without making too much noise. When I reached him, his face was grim but hopeful. Found one with keys, he whispered, holding up a set of rusty old keys. But it might take a few tries to get this thing started. You go get Jimmy. I'll start working on the motor. I nodded, already heading back. I'll get him. Start it as soon as you can. We need all the time we can get. As I sprinted back toward Jimmy's dock, I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread gnawing at me. I'd heard nothing from him. No noise, no sign of movement. The quiet was unsettling. Boat after boat, I searched for him, checking cabins, peering through portholes. Nothing. No Jimmy. God damn it, Jimmy, I muttered, my pulse racing. Panic began to claw at my chest as I picked up the pace, abandoning any attempt at stealth. The wind howled around me, the distant groaning of the horde growing closer. Just as I reached the last boat at the end of the dock, I heard it. The sound of Dave's motor cranking to life. Loud. The engine roared, cutting through the stillness of the night like a chainsaw through bone. I froze for a split second, knowing full well what that sound meant. Every zombie within a mile was going to be on us in minutes. Frantically, I tore into the last boat, screaming Jimmy's name. Jimmy! For a moment, there was silence. And then, from the back of the boat's cabin, an irritated voice called out, "What?" I rushed toward the closed door at the back of the cabin, pounding on it with my fists. "We gotta go, man. The horde's coming. Why the hell didn't you answer?" The door creaked open, and there stood Jimmy, pulling up his pants with a sheepish grin. "I was taking a shit." I stared at him, dumbfounded. What? I thought I'd be fine choosing the farthest boat to enjoy a peaceful dump, but no. Even in the damn alpaca's lips, I can't use the bathroom in peace. Holy shit, Jimmy, we don't have time for this. I grabbed him by the arm, dragging him out of the boat. The horde's coming, we've got to move. We burst out onto the dock, the sound of the approaching horde growing closer. I could see them now. Hundreds, maybe thousands of zombies, pouring over the streets like a tidal wave of rotting flesh and fury. They were closing in fast. Run! I shouted, my legs burning as I sprinted toward Dave's boat, still waiting at the end of the dock. Jimmy was right behind me, but I could hear the horde getting closer, their footsteps pounding on the wood like a death march. The dock creaked and swayed under the weight of the incoming mob, the groans of the undead filling the air with a deafening roar. We were almost there, just a few more steps. Then Jimmy tripped. He went down hard, crashing into a stack of buckets and pails, the sound reverberating down the dock like a gunshot. The zombies, already in a frenzy, went wild. Their pace quickened, their eyes locked on us with ravenous hunger. "Jimmy, swim!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with panic. "What?" he yelled, dazed. "Swim!" I bellowed, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him off the dock into the water. He splashed down with a panicked yelp, flailing for a moment before breaking into the world's worst breaststroke. He wasn't fast, but he was moving, thankfully. I turned to run, the horde now just feet behind me. I could feel the stench of them, rotting, putrid death, like a wall of decay about to swallow me whole. I dove into the water just as the first of them reached the edge of the dock, their bodies tumbling over the side in a chaotic, writhing mass. Hundreds of them spilled into the water like a nightmare unleashed. I swam as fast as I could, my arms burning, lungs aching. Every second felt like an eternity. The water churned around me, zombies thrashing and splashing behind me, their gnarled hands reaching for anything they could grab. Finally, I reached the boat. Jimmy was already there, pulling me up onto the ladder with all his strength. I collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air as Dave expertly backed the boat out, turning us toward the open water. We were alive. Barely. As we floated away, the horde continued to spill into the harbor, hundreds of zombies splashing into the water, their moans echoing in the night. Dave wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing back at us. "We never got to do that karaoke, you know?" Jimmy, still catching his breath, chuckled. "There's never a better time than now." I looked at him, completely worn out, but for the first time in hours, a grin tugged at the corner of my mouth. Covered in blood, gore, and the remnants of the undead, this should have been the last thing we were thinking about. But hell, what did we have to lose? We sat down at the back of the boat, watching the city burn behind us, the water filled with flailing zombies still trying to reach us, but being dragged under by the weight of the others. The night air was thick with the scent of decay and the distant crackle of flames. But here, out of the water, it felt almost peaceful. Jimmy reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, cracked and smeared with God knows what. "Hang on," he muttered, fiddling with it. "Let me find it." I raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you've still got battery after all this?" He smirked, scrolling through his playlist. "Told you I keep it charged for emergencies. And, my friends, this is an emergency." Suddenly, the opening chords of Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'" filled the air. The song echoed across the water, mixing with the distant chaos of the city. It was ridiculous, absolutely absurd. But it was exactly what we needed. Dave groaned, leaning back on the wheel. "Really, man? Journey?" Jimmy shrugged, standing up and raising his hands in the air like he was about to play in a stadium. "There's no better farewell than this. You can't tell me otherwise." I couldn't help it. I laughed hard. The kind of laugh that comes when you've been running on fear, adrenaline, and terror for so long that your body just needs something, anything, to let it out. Jimmy sang along terribly, his voice cracking, Dave shaking his head with a grin, and before I knew it, I was singing too. "Don't stop believin'," I croaked, throwing up a middle finger to the burning city as we sailed away. It was surreal. Here we were, 3 survivors, blood-soaked and exhausted, belting out an 80s anthem while the world fell apart behind us. We didn't know what was waiting out there. We had no guarantee that we'd survive the next day, the next hour even. But in that moment, we were free. Just 3 idiots on a boat, flipping off a horde of zombies and the apocalypse itself. The boat picked up speed as Dave pushed the throttle, the motor humming louder as we left the docks and the city behind. The wind picked up, tugging at the tattered sails above us. Soon we'd switch over to wind power, riding out into whatever future awaited us. But for now, as the city faded into the horizon and the flames grew smaller in the distance, we sang, loud and off-key, defiant against everything the world had thrown at us. Jimmy stood on the edge of the boat, pointing toward the water. "Look at them, man. Bunch of dead assholes, and we made it." I stood next to him, squinting out at the sea of zombies still splashing helplessly in the water. They were relentless, mindless, and utterly terrifying. But here, on this boat, they couldn't touch us. "We did it," I said quietly, the weight of it finally sinking in. "We actually made it." Dave steered us farther out, away from the chaos, toward the open ocean where the horizon was a vast, dark unknown. We didn't have a map, a real plan, or even a solid idea of what came next. But for the first time in what felt like forever, we had hope. As the last chords of the song faded into the night, I leaned back against the railing, staring up at the stars that were just beginning to peek through the haze. The sky above was vast, endless, and for once it didn't feel like it was closing in on us. Jimmy flopped down next to me, stretching his arms wide. "I can't believe we're still alive. Feels like I should have been zombie chow about 5 times over by now." I grinned, shaking my head. "You and your bathroom breaks, man. You're gonna get us killed one day." He shrugged, smirking. "Hey, when nature calls, you gotta answer, even in the alpaca's lips." Dave chuckled from the wheel. "Well, maybe next time you pick a closer boat, huh?" Jimmy raised a pretend glass to that. "To closer boats and better dumps." "To getting the hell out of this nightmare," I added, raising an invisible glass of my own. The boat cut through the water, the waves gently lapping against the hull as we sailed into the unknown. The city, with all its horror and chaos, was finally behind us. The open sea lay ahead, an uncertain future, but one we were ready to face. For now, we'd savor this small victory, this moment of peace in a world gone mad. And as we sailed into the darkness, the final distant screams of the city faded into nothing. "Don't stop believing," Jimmy whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the wind. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't. We didn't. We sailed on. This has been The 13th Floor, Escape from Terror. Written by Damien Crowe. Narrated by Khai Lannor. Copyright 2024 by Damien Crowe. Production copyright by Damien Crowe.